When I moved out of my parents' house and into my own apartment, I had a lot of junk and stuff that I needed to get rid of. I never liked Craigslist because I always found it sketchy, especially after hearing so many stories about it. So I listed a lot of my things on Facebook Marketplace. Things that wouldn't fit in my apartment and that my dad wanted out of the house. My weight set, some old childhood toys, book sets, and a whole bunch of other things. The weight set was what I listed for the most money. It had a barbell, a plate tree stand, and a bunch of plates. I was selling it for $340, which I thought wasn't a bad deal. Surprisingly, I wasn't getting many bites. I'd have some people here and there message asking if it's still available, and then never message me again about it. Until a few days after posting it, a guy named Joe messaged me showing interest. His profile picture was pretty grainy, but it was a guy with a fishing hat on holding up a fish. His account info was private. I couldn't see how many friends he had or anything, only that we had 3 mutuals. All 3 of them were girls from my town. The guy's last name was also the last name of a Joe I knew from my town who used to date a girl I was somewhat friendly with, so I right away assumed it was him, especially since I knew that guy liked to fish. After telling him it's still available, he said, "Great, when can I pick it up?" I was pleasantly surprised he didn't try to haggle the price down at all. I said I'm available any night after 7. He said he could come by tonight around 11 p.m. after work. I said that's fine. A little late in my opinion, but if that's what worked for his schedule, it worked for me. I then decided to just be a little friendly and say, "Hey, you used to date Gina, right?" I saw the typing indicator in the chat for a second, but then it went away and he didn't reply. Not for a couple minutes. Then he said yes. I thought it was a little strange, the random pause, but it could have been anything. Maybe he thought it was weird I brought it up, so I just said, "I knew I recognized your name, LOL." He read the message but didn't respond for half an hour. Then I got a message back from him saying, "Yeah, LOL. Can you send me your address and I'll let you know when I'm coming?" So I sent him my address. He read it and didn't respond for many hours. By the time I got home from work, it was around 6. I went to the gym and got back around 7:30, the whole time waiting for some kind of acknowledgement from Joe. And then he finally messaged back asking for my number. I gave it to him, and seconds later, I got a text from a number with our area code. I have an iPhone, and when I texted him back, it was green. I sometimes will find that to be a red flag and possibly scams, because most people I know have iPhones, but I wasn't thinking that way with this because I knew this guy already. He said he'd be over in a few hours, and so I continued about my business. It was now around 11 o'clock, and I was waiting patiently for his text or call. I sent a follow-up saying, "Let me know when you're coming." It was around 11:30 that he texted me, "I'm here, come out." I looked out the front window of my apartment, and I saw a dark-colored car out front in the street. I tried calling him so I could tell him that I'd need help bringing the weights outside. He rejected my call, and then he texted again, "Yo, come out." I texted back, "I see you. You can come in. I just need help with the weights. There's a lot of them." He texted back, "Nah, gotta see if you're straight first." I had to process what the hell that even meant for a second. All I knew was this did not seem like the way this white-as-hell fishing dude would be texting. I tried calling one more time, and he denied the call again. Now I was suspicious. I decided to text that girl Gina, along with the mutual friends I had with Joe on Facebook. The first one to text back was this girl Angela, who said, "OMG, that's a catfish, someone's pretending to be him." When I asked why she added it, she said it must have been a different name when it added her. I looked out the window again, and the car was still there. Someone was about to do something bad to me. I wasn't sure what, or who, or why. I had no way to contact the real Joe because he didn't seem to have any actual social media profiles. Not public, at least. I kept the door shut and locked and didn't respond any further. I turned off the light in the living room and kinked the blind just a bit, and I swear on my life, there was a guy hiding behind one of the bushes in front of the house. I watched until the car outside honked its horn, and then I saw the guy in the bushes run to the car, and then the car sped off. Witnessing that, I didn't feel relief. I felt gut-wrenching fear, not only of what I just narrowly avoided, but the fact that those people now had my address. The Facebook profile was deleted the next day, after a bunch of people reported it, though I think the people who made the account deleted it or deactivated it themselves. Joe himself confirmed he had nothing to do with any of that, and that someone must have been using his pictures and name to try and scam people in the area. though I'm not so sure it was someone trying to scam random people, because days later I got this threatening text. "Hey yo bitch, watch your back, we know where you live. Keep trying to talk to my girl, see what happens man, we'll fuck you up right outside your crib. Sleep with one eye open pussy, we watching." I brought this to the police, but it was such a low priority report to them that I doubt they ever even looked into it. I have no reason to lie when I say I haven't tried talking to anyone's girl in the slightest. At the time of this incident, I had been seeing a girl pretty much exclusively. I think it's connected. I don't know who it is, I don't know what they were going to do to me if I opened the door, but unfortunately I've had to live in slight fear in my new apartment ever since moving here. Fortunately, I haven't gotten any more threatening or random texts, but I still pretty much always check outside my windows first before leaving the apartment at night. It had to be 2018. I was selling this old pinball machine that we had from our childhood. It wasn't some crazy arcade level pinball machine that would cost thousands of dollars, but it was definitely worth a few $100. It had been sitting in my parents' attic for the longest time, so I wanted to sell it before one of my sisters had the same idea. I didn't really want anyone to know about this because then I'd have to split the money, so I chose to list it when my family was away on a trip that I couldn't go on due to work. I'm a bit of a sneak, I know, but you gotta do what you gotta do. My parents' house is on the really nice side of town, but not in a gated community. I put the pinball machine up on Facebook Marketplace for $200. The next day, I got a message from some account with no profile picture with the name Jasmine, expressing interest in the pinball machine. They offered $175. I agreed to that number. We set up a time for when she would come, but when that time came, she never showed up. She messaged me saying, "I'll be there soon, I'll be there soon." It was getting late now and I had work the next day. I asked her if she would be here by 11 the latest. She said 11:30. I asked if we could do this tomorrow instead, but she said she's already on her way. So I just stayed up a little later waiting. 11:45 rolls around and she finally tells me that she's here. I went to the front door and saw there was a car out front. What I wasn't expecting was to see all 4 doors of the car opening and 4 people stepping out, 1 girl and 3 guys. I messaged her, "Are you here with people?" At this point, she wasn't answering her messages anymore. I watched as the 4 people approached my door. I kept the storm door locked. These 3 guys looked kind of big, and all 4 of these people looked like trouble. As they got close enough, I said, "Are you Jasmine?" She said through the door, "Yeah." I said, "I can't let all of you guys in my house, my parents are asleep," obviously lying. Jasmine, or so she claimed her name was, tried opening the door yelling, "What are you talking about?" As she saw it was locked, she started knocking on the glass. I decided it was best to shut the front door at this point. I heard their voices yelling outside for a while and the doorbell ringing. I heard one of the guys, or maybe even multiple of them, yelling obscenities and insults at me through the 2 doors, making me only gladder I didn't let them in. These were not the kinds of people I wanted in my parents' house, especially when I'm alone. I realized this whole thing was an awful idea when I heard their voices laughing and yelling on the front stoop for like 10 minutes after I shut the door. I looked out my little brother's bedroom window upstairs, which is directly above the driveway, and I saw one of the guys pissing in the empty driveway. No cars in the driveway was not a good look. The girl yelled something directed at me as they finally started to walk away, but I didn't hear what it was. I just thanked the Lord when they drove away, and I went upstairs to go to sleep. I was having trouble sleeping that night though, thinking of the interaction. So, fully awake, a couple of hours after climbing into bed, I heard a crash from downstairs. It was unmistakably the sound of a window being shattered. I sprang up, but right before sprinting to make sure the bedroom door was locked, I stopped myself and instead quietly got out of bed and tiptoed to the door. I had already locked it. I tiptoed back to my bed and had my phone in hand, ready to call 911. For some stupid reason, I was waiting till I heard any other kind of sounds before dialing, and eventually, I heard the sound I needed to hear. Footsteps rapidly coming upstairs. I dialed 911 as I felt like throwing up. The footsteps outside the room didn't even sound like they were trying to be quiet. I whispered the entire time I was on the line with the dispatcher. Time was moving in reverse. I hid literally under my bed as I listened to people ransacking the house. In reality, they were in and out in less than 5 minutes, way before the police actually showed up. The backyard window was shattered. Things were stolen from just about each room. Ironically, the pinball machine wasn't taken. What happened from there was I got a police report number. I made an appointment to see a couple detectives at the police station and shared with them all the details I had, including the Facebook account of the Jasmine girl. I fabricated the story a bit, saying someone in the house threatened me. My reasoning for this was I felt that this case would actually be taken seriously if I claimed I was threatened. To my surprise, they did take this seriously. The detectives apparently gathered the necessary data of the Facebook account in question to track this Jasmine girl, who lived a few towns over, in a less than desirable area. And with a search warrant, they searched her house and found multiple belongings stolen from my parents' house. She ratted out the 3 men who accompanied her, and they were all charged with burglary. I think most of the stuff that was stolen was recovered. I'm sure there were some things that I wasn't aware of that were stolen that were never returned, but to this day it hasn't come up, so it's fine. I think by me claiming I was verbally threatened may have definitely helped make the detectives take this more seriously, but I could be wrong. My family was of course livid at first, but came to be understanding about it in the end. I was searching Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace for a new phone. This was a long time ago, so it had to be like an iPhone 7 or something. Phones still had the home buttons back then. I found this listing for a phone. It was some generic looking post. iPhone whatever for sale, new, around $300. It was a really good deal for the time, that I remember. He told me all the small details I needed to know, that it was factory unlocked, never opened, and stuff like that. He sent me a video of the box too, still sealed. The guy, whose name was Melvin, seemed nice and easy to talk to over text. I got his number and we discussed a pickup point. His location on the Facebook ad was much closer to me, but over text he was telling me he was only there this morning, and now he went about an hour north. I wasn't happy about this, but this was a really good deal and I didn't want to pass it up. I started asking a bunch of friends if they'd want to come on an adventure with me. Really just a way of making the chore of accompanying me for an hour drive seem fun. My friend Martina actually agreed to come with, on the promise that I buy her food for coming. So this Melvin guy sent me the address of a police precinct about an hour away, saying he only does deals in police precinct parking lots to avoid scams. I obviously had no problem with this. In fact, it made me feel a little more confident in this whole thing. I picked up Martina on the way around 8:30 at night, and off we went. She being in the car and having someone to talk to made the trip more fun. It was also a Friday night, so afterwards we could go out and do whatever we wanted. When I got off the highway, we were about 10 minutes away, and we found ourselves in a very secluded, quiet area. It seemed like a lot of different wooded areas. Occasional buildings and houses, and then more woods. We got to the police precinct, and there was no one visibly parked in the parking lot, besides empty police cars, of course. We drove around the whole building a couple times and didn't see this Melvin guy, who said he was in a black Altima, so I decided to call him. He picked up and said he's having issues with his car on the side of the road, and asked if I could come to him. He sent his location and I checked it. He was on the side of some random road with nothing on either side, and by nothing I mean woods. That's the kind of area we were in. He asked me to come help him jump his car. He had jumper cables. I said, yeah, I guess I could do that. I mean, we drove the hour to get there. I didn't want to just drive another hour for nothing. Martina was shaking her head the whole time I was on the phone. The guy said, "See you soon," and hung up. Martina then basically screamed, "No way, this is sketchy, we're going home." I told her we'll just drive past the location he sent and see what's up. I did agree with her though. This seemed incredibly sketchy. I just was very upset if we drove 2 hours for nothing. We did drive to the location, and when we got to it, we saw the reflection of a car's front lights coming up on the pitch black road we found ourselves on. As we got closer, I slowed down, and it was in fact a black car, but we couldn't see anyone inside or outside of it. Mind you, it was very dark, but I feel like we would have seen someone's head on the inside or something. Martina said to just keep driving, and I said I know. It was about the sketchiest thing I'd ever seen. A pitch black road between 2 patches of woods, no streetlights, no other cars in sight. A pretty convenient place to break down and have someone who's coming with a wad of cash to buy something from you come and meet. I drove right past it. Immediately, Melvin starts calling me over and over. I ignored every single call. Then he texted me saying, "I saw you just pass me, why didn't you stop? Turn around." Ignored. Martina is a very positive person, so she laughed about this whole situation, and then said, "Okay, you owe me food." So I looked up the nearest diner, and we stopped there for some food. It was a quiet, small diner. We were just about the only people in there, even on a Friday night. The waitress just took our coffee order, when a lone guy with his hood up steps into the diner and sits in one of the bar stools. He was wearing a navy blue, dirty-looking hoodie. He glanced over to Martina and I, then looked straight ahead, talking to the lady working behind the counter, apparently ordering a coffee. The man kept glancing at our table like every minute, so I whispered to Martina, "Don't look now, but that guy at the counter might be the Melvin guy." The waitress came with our coffees. I asked if we were ready to order. I said, "A few minutes, please." When the lady behind the counter handed that man his coffee, he said loud and clear, "Thank you, darling." It was that guy from the phone's voice, Melvin or whatever his real name was. I told Martina that's him. We need to pay the check and leave. I waved the server over and whispered to her if we can just get the check. She asked if something's wrong, and I noticed the guy look over as I said this. I said yes, we just needed some coffee for the road. So she got the check, I paid, we downed our coffees, and left the building. We got in my car, and Martina said, "Oh my god, he's getting up." I looked into the diner and saw that guy leaving towards the door. As quickly as possible, I drove us out of that parking lot and sped down the road. And yes, we noticed a black car in the parking lot that could have been the one that we saw on the side of the road. I was driving too fast for him to have caught up. We got back on the highway and I was flying for a while, until I got a low tire pressure light come on. I knew instantly he slashed my tire. The PSI was going down fast, so to avoid damage, I pulled to the side of the highway and parked it. I went out to confirm that my tire was slashed. I had to replace the tire with the spare, which took about 15 minutes. The whole thing was a disaster, and if you're wondering, yes, I still got Martina dinner that night. Now Martina and I look at it as a crazy story that we can look back on and tell people. It's absolutely horrifying, though, how close we were to walking into a trap. I'm 29 now, and I've had a lot of horrific experiences, but nothing sits in my brain the way one night from when I was 15 does. It was my first real babysitting job that wasn't just watching a cousin for an hour while my aunt ran to the store. This was a family friend, the kind where your parents know their parents, and everyone assumes it's basically safe by default. They're cool with me telling this story online, so their names are Mark and Diane, and their son Charlie was 5. They lived in a nice house in a quiet, normal neighborhood. Looking back, that's part of why it messed with me. It didn't feel like the kind of house where anything bad could happen. It felt like a normal place, like where I grew up. It was a Friday night in early fall. My parents dropped me off around 6:30, and Mark and Diane were already dressed up. Mark shook my hand like I was applying for a job at his office, and Diane kept calling me a lifesaver. Mark and Diane went over the basics, like when we eat, what we eat, when his light's out, and keeping his door cracked open. If he has to use the bathroom, walk him there, because he sometimes gets scared in the hallway at night. Mark also pointed out the locks. There was a front door lock they never used because they came in through the garage. The back door, though, was the one I'd use if I needed to step out onto the deck. He mentioned I'd have to lock both the locks, and he pointed to the deadbolt up top and the regular doorbell lock underneath. I nodded like I understood. I thought it was obvious. I thought a lock was a lock. They left around 7. As soon as their car pulled away, Charlie asked if we could play board games and hide and seek. And the hide and seek I tried to talk him out of because the house was bigger than I expected, and I didn't want him hiding somewhere stupid and getting hurt. We compromised by playing a simple card matching game at the coffee table, then a video game on the little console in the family room. It was one of those kids games where you basically just run around collecting stuff and the character can't really die. Around 7:45, I heated up the food Diana had left. It was mac and cheese and chicken nuggets, basically babysitter cheat code. Charlie ate in front of the TV, which his parents probably didn't normally let him do, but I wasn't trying to be the strict babysitter on my first paid job. After dinner, we brushed his teeth and went to his room. His room was on the second floor. The house had this wide hallway that ran past a couple bedrooms and a bathroom. Charlie's room was at the end, and it had a small closet with sliding doors. Inside, from what I could tell earlier when he grabbed a toy, it was mostly little kid clothes and some storage bins on the top shelf. His room had a hamper in the corner by his dresser, one of those tall ones with a lid. There was a nightlight on his dresser that glowed soft yellow. I tucked him in and read him a short book, and as I was walking out, he asked if I'd stay in the hallway for a minute. I stood outside his door and listened to him rustle around for maybe 30 seconds. Then his voice went quiet, and I figured he was settled. I left his door cracked like they said. Diane had showed me the guest bedroom where I could hang out once Charlie was asleep. It was down the hallway from Charlie's room, closer to the stairs. It had a small TV, like a spare room TV, and a bed with a comforter that looked like it was never used. I turned the TV on and flipped through the channels until I found some random show. I lay on top of the bed, shoes off, phone in my pocket. It felt like the job was basically done, but that lasted maybe 40 minutes. I was half watching the TV when I heard soft footsteps in the hallway. I looked up, and Charlie was standing in the doorway of the guest room. He was rubbing his eyes and holding his stuffed animal. His face didn't look sleepy though, he looked scared. I asked what was wrong. He didn't come in at first, he just whispered, "Chris." I motioned him over, and he walked in slowly, like he didn't want to turn his back to the hallway. He said he heard something in his closet. I tried to assure him it was likely a house settling noise, that houses creak a lot. He shook his head fast, saying no, it was more like a scratch. I still knew it had to just be typical toddler imagination. I told him there were no monsters in his closet and asked if he wanted me to check. He nodded, and I walked him back to his room. I turned his light on fully and looked at the closet. The sliding doors were closed. I slid one open and peeked inside. Admittedly, I took just a quick peek because I knew no one was in there, and I just saw a bunch of clothes. I even pushed some clothes aside like I was actually searching. I slid the door closed and saw relief on his face. I tucked him back in and went back to the guest room, but 15 minutes later, I heard footsteps again. This time Charlie came in quicker, and he was more upset. He said, "Chris, the closet door moved." I sat up and tried not to show annoyance, even though I felt it for a second. I tried to stay patient. I said, "Okay, let's go check." We walked back down the hallway, and when we got to his room, I stopped in the doorway. The closet door was fully open. One of the sliding panels was pushed all the way to the side. I stared at it for a second, and I remember my stomach doing this little drop, not because I thought someone was in there right away, but because it didn't match what I remembered. I knew I closed it. I looked at Charlie and asked why he opened that in a tone that would imply I'm not happy, but the way he swore he didn't, it didn't come across like he was lying. I walked over and slid the closet door shut, but the thing is, the way it closed, it didn't feel like it could have drifted open on its own. I gave Charlie a look meant to imply that I knew he was playing around with the door, maybe trying to scare me. I tucked him back in and told him he was fine and to go to sleep. I left the room, and on the way back to the guest bedroom, I caught myself listening for sounds behind me, like someone was walking in the hallway. I told myself to stop being stupid. I was 15 in a family friend's house on a safe street. About 10 minutes later, instead of footsteps, I heard Charlie call out. It wasn't a scream, but rather a shaky raised voice like he was trying not to yell but needed me. It came from his room. I got up and walked out. As I got closer, I could hear him crying softly. I stepped into his room and saw him sitting in bed with tears on his face. I immediately looked at the closet. The door was closed. That should have been reassuring, but it wasn't. I said, "Hey buddy, what happened?" He didn't answer right away. He just lifted his arm and pointed toward the corner of the room. I followed where he was pointing, and for a second, my brain didn't process what I was seeing. There was a hamper in that corner, and behind it, pressed into the narrow space between the hamper and the wall, was a person crouched down. They were hiding, trying to make themselves as small as possible. The first thing I saw was a shoulder, then the shoes, then his partially hidden face, but I could see his eyes looking straight at me. The whole thing lasted maybe 2 seconds before my body reacted. I didn't scream, I simply decided it was time to move, so I grabbed Charlie with both arms, yanked him out of bed, and picked him up like he weighed nothing. I backed toward the door, never taking my eyes off that corner. The person surprisingly didn't move at first. They stayed crouched, as if they stayed still enough we'd forget he was there. I ran us toward the guest room and locked the door. I did my best to keep Charlie quiet as I called 911. I told the operator there was someone in the house. I gave the address and said I was babysitting, and there was a man in the kids' room. The operator asked if the intruder had a weapon. I said I didn't know. She asked if we were safe. I said we were locked in a bedroom upstairs. She told me to stay on the line. I kept expecting the doorknob to start turning or expecting the door to shake. The operator kept talking to me to keep me calm, asking me to describe the person, but I couldn't. All I could say was I saw the person's eyes hidden behind a hamper. The eventual sound of distant sirens getting closer was the first time I was ever relieved to hear police sirens in my life. The operator told me to wait until an officer came to my door and identified themselves. When the police finally came upstairs, one of them knocked and said, "Chris?" because I guess dispatch had my name. I unlocked the door and opened it, and 2 officers were there with flashlights. They looked past me into the room, then at Charlie. They had already done a sweep downstairs and didn't see anyone. They didn't have to kick the door down because the front door was wide open. They checked every possible hiding spot in the house. Whoever it was had left. They said based on the timeline, he probably slipped out fast when I ran, went down the stairs, and ran out the front door. When Mark and Diane got home, they arrived to the police cars outside and officers in their living room. A lot of emotions filled the room for sure. Mark asked me questions I couldn't really answer, just like the police did. A cop asked about the locks and entry points. Mark immediately went to the back door and checked it. I followed because I felt like I needed to see. The deadbolt at the top was unlocked. Mark looked at me and asked, "Did you lock both locks like I said?" I said, "I locked the bottom one." He said the bottom one pops if the knob gets jiggled. That's why he told me both. He wasn't raising his voice, but I knew he was upset. However, he didn't stay upset for long and was grateful I saved Charlie from danger. The worst part is thinking about what would have happened if Charlie hadn't come to get me, if he'd stayed in his room trying to be brave while that person was in there, or if I'd been downstairs messing around on my phone, not paying attention, or if I'd told Charlie to go back to bed without checking. So to parents or babysitters or anyone out there who takes care of kids, don't always dismiss the things they say as just their imagination. The third time I babysat AJ was the only time I was ever asked to stay overnight at someone else's house, and it's also the last time I ever babysat for anyone at all. I was 17, a senior in high school, and I had already watched AJ twice before. He was 8, quiet, and the kind of kid who didn't really look at you when you talked to him. The first time I met his mom, she told me he was a loner and mostly kept to himself, so I shouldn't expect much interaction. She said that like it was a good thing, like it meant the job would be easy, and honestly, the first 2 times kind of were. I barely had to do anything besides heat up food and remind him when it was time to get ready for bed. He'd just sit in his room playing video games like Grand Theft Auto for hours. The third time was different because his mom asked if I could spend the night. She said she had to be out of town for work and wouldn't be back until late the next morning. She sounded stressed on the phone, like she didn't have many options, so I said yes. I figured it would be the same as before, just longer and more money. When I got to the house that afternoon, she rushed through the instructions at the kitchen counter while AJ was already upstairs. She said there was frozen pizza in the freezer, and he usually fed himself breakfast cereal, and I could sleep in the extra room at the end of the hallway. She thanked me like 3 times before she even left. When she did, I called up the stairs to let AJ know I was there, even though he already knew, and he just yelled back a short "yeah" without coming down. For the next few hours, I barely saw him. I could hear the video games through the ceiling, the sounds of gunshots and cars crashing in his game. At one point, I went upstairs to check on him and found him sitting on the floor of his room, controller in hand, eyes locked on the screen. He didn't look away when I asked if he was okay. He just nodded while staring at the TV. I went back downstairs and tried to watch something in the living room, but it felt weird being in someone else's house overnight. Around 7, I made the pizza and called AJ down. When he came down, he didn't say hi or anything. He just grabbed 2 slices, looks at me with this expression I still can't fully describe, like I'd done something to annoy him just by existing, and then went back upstairs without a word. He was acting unfriendlier than usual this time. I stood there in the kitchen holding my own plate, feeling awkward and kind of unwelcome in a house I was supposed to be in charge of for the night. I figured he was just a weird kid and didn't take it personally. After I cleaned up, I went upstairs to get ready for bed. The guest room was basic and small. I left the door half open because I didn't like the idea of being fully closed in. I was sitting on the bed talking to my friend Bree when I got this strange feeling like I was being watched. I looked up and saw AJ's head slowly move back out of view from the crack in the doorway. He had just been standing there looking in. I laughed a little because it startled me more than anything, and I called out to him asking what he was doing. He didn't answer. I heard soft footsteps go down the hallway toward his room. I remember thinking it was kind of funny, like he was just being a nosy kid, and I didn't think much of it after that. Around 11, I put my phone down and turned off the lamp. I rolled onto my side and closed my eyes, trying to fall asleep. I don't know how much time passed before I felt like I wasn't alone in the room. I opened my eyes and saw a dark shape at the foot of the bed. It took a few seconds for me to process that it was someone standing there. I let out a scream before I could stop myself and scrambled for the lamp. When I turned it on, I saw AJ standing at the end of the bed, completely still. The look on his face is still hard to describe. He looked annoyed, yet also scared or regretful of what he was about to do. Both of his hands were behind his back. I sat up and asked him what he was doing in there. He didn't answer. I told him to show me what he had behind his back. He shook his head no, still not breaking eye contact. That scared me more than if he yelled or cried. I got out of bed and moved toward him, telling him he needed to go back to his room. When I reached him, I grabbed his arm and turned him slightly, and that's when I saw the handle of a large kitchen knife in his hand. That's when I screamed again and covered my mouth with my hand without even meaning to. I yelled at him to get out of the room, to go, to leave. My whole body was shaking. He didn't argue, he just ran out into the hallway, still holding the knife. I rushed to the door, slammed it shut, and locked it. I fumbled with my phone, trying to call his mom because my hands were actually shaking. When she answered, I could barely get the words out. I told her AJ came into my room with a knife while I was sleeping. There was a long silence on the other end. Then her voice changed completely. She sounded horrified, like she had been expecting something bad, but not this bad. She kept apologizing over and over, saying she was so sorry and that she believed me. I told her I couldn't stay there. I didn't care about the money or anything else. I just needed someone else to come watch him. She didn't argue at all. She said she would call her ex-husband and have him come right away. I stayed locked in that room for almost an hour, scared shitless. Eventually, there was a knock at the front door and a man's voice calling AJ's name. I cracked the guest room door and saw a man I recognized from a photo in the house. He went straight down the hall toward AJ's room without saying much to me. I grabbed my bag, walked past them without looking into AJ's room, and left the house as fast as I could. His mom sent me the money through Venmo later that night, along with another long apology, but I never went back there. I never even babysat for another family after that. I feel like I was actually close to becoming a news article online about a babysitter getting murdered by a child. I was 21 when my sister asked me to watch her kids overnight while she and her husband went to a wedding a few hours away. I had babysat my niece Emma and my nephew Lucas plenty of times before, so it wasn't a big deal. Emma was 6, quiet and sensitive, and Luke was 9, more talkative but still easy. They live in a normal suburban house in a quiet neighborhood not far from our childhood home. My sister walked me through the usual routine before they left, since this time I'd be staying overnight. Leftover Chinese food for dinner, and no scary shows, and bed by 9. She reminded me Emma sometimes got nervous at night and might call for me once or twice. After they left, the kids and I ate in the living room and watched a movie. It felt like a completely normal night. Around 9, I took them upstairs. Their bedrooms were across the hall from each other, with a bathroom in between. I tucked Emma in first. She asked if I'd leave her door open a little and keep the hallway light on. Lucas just rolled over and told me goodnight like he was already half asleep. I went downstairs and turned on the TV, keeping the volume low so they wouldn't hear. Around like 9:30 to 10, I heard footsteps upstairs. I figured Emma needed something. I started up the stairs, but before I got halfway, I saw her walking along the balcony toward the top step. She was standing there in her pajamas looking down at me. I asked what was wrong. She said I already came in her room and told her to go back to sleep, but she hadn't been able to. I stopped on the stairs and told her I hadn't been upstairs since I put them to bed. She thought I was joking at first. She said I stood in her doorway a few minutes ago and told her everything was fine in a whisper. I told her maybe she was dreaming it and walked her back to her room. I checked her closet and under the bed, even though I knew nothing would be there. She finally settled back in, but she kept watching me as I left, like she wasn't convinced. I went back downstairs, feeling slightly uneasy, but still telling myself kids mix dreams with reality all the time. About 20 minutes later, Lucas came down, rubbing his eyes. He asked why I came into his room. I felt a chill go through me. I told him I didn't. He said I stood by his dresser and looked at him, then walked out without saying anything. I tried to keep my voice calm and told him he must have been half asleep, but now this was weird, because both of them said pretty similar things. Instead of going back to bed, he stayed next to me on the couch now. That was when I started to really listen to the house. Every small sound felt louder. I turned the TV off, and the silence literally made my ears ring. Lucas noticed me doing this, and I think it started to scare him when I told him to shush for a second. I heard something upstairs. It was light footsteps running, and then I saw her running across the balcony upstairs and then racing down the stairs, screaming Uncle Dan a bunch of times. When she got to the living room, I asked her what's wrong, and she started crying, saying there's someone upstairs. I think this was around the time my heart really started racing. They weren't playing a little kid prank on me. She was crying genuine tears. I asked her why she thought there's someone upstairs, and she responded saying someone came in her room again and said goodnight, but it didn't sound like me. I think by now, I was internally freaking the fuck out, but I told them to keep calm. I didn't want Emma to cause Lucas to start crying now too. I told them to wait down here, I'll go check upstairs and be right back. And that's exactly what I planned to do. But I wasn't going up there without a weapon at this point. I went to the kitchen, secretly grabbed a knife, and placed it in front of me as I walked back into the living room and then up the stairs. The kids were still on the couch. I made it to the upstairs balcony that overlooks the living room. I did a little march as I walked across it to try to make them laugh, but it didn't work. As I passed the balcony and into the upstairs foyer that led to the kids' bedrooms, I can't iterate enough just how much I wasn't expecting what happened next. I heard something in Emma's room. I peered inside and thought I saw something or someone. I quietly said hello so the kids wouldn't hear, but I wasn't expecting someone to respond. In a very weird, high-pitched voice, yet still sounding like a grown man, someone said, "Aren't they just so special?" The voice sounded like it belonged to someone with mental issues, maybe not fully there. I I then realized what I was seeing in the bedroom was a really tall person standing next to Emma's bed now. I guess like 6'4", they looked to be like 6 inches taller than me. My heart was in my throat. I turned and ran down the stairs and grabbed the kids. I told them, "Put your shoes on now, we're leaving," and Emma started to cry even more. I quickly saw why. Peering around the wall up the balcony upstairs was this grotesque-looking man doing peekaboo with his hands toward the kids. I said forget the shoes and ran the kids outside with me in their socks. We ran to a house a couple doors down where I saw lights on inside, and I rang the bell 5 times. The lady who answered knew Lucas and Emma. I introduced myself and quickly explained the situation. She let us in immediately into safety. I got on the phone with 911 and stood on the front porch of this couple's house watching my sister's house. And as I saw that man casually strolling out of her house, walking down the walkway into the darkness of the street in the opposite way, the 911 operator told me not to engage him in any way and that officers would be there soon. But boy do I regret listening to that operator. I should have followed that fucking creep down the street. I should have been a man and beaten him to a pulp. But realistically, I didn't know if he was armed or not. And based on his voice, I choose to believe it was some mentally handicapped person who simply walked right into the house. I stayed on the stoop watching the man until he disappeared down an intersecting street, and I told the operator which street it was. She kept making it seem like the cops would be heading down that direction, but it took so long for them to arrive that by then, that man was gone, possibly into one of the houses in the vicinity for all anyone would know. I wasn't happy with the response time, and I let the police know that. I went into my sister's house with them to investigate, and nothing seemed out of the sorts, nor was anyone else inside. Of course, given the circumstances, I drove the kids home to my parents' house with me that night to sleep there. We weren't going to sleep in that house that night regardless. And of course, there was somehow blame put on me that the one night I was watching them, someone breaks into the house. However, I firmly believe that man was in there before I even got there. I did not go needlessly unlocking doors or anything like that. Ever since then, my sister and my brother-in-law have been nuts with the security cameras. They have at least 6 all over the house, inside and out. But honestly, who can blame them after this? This happened on New Year's Eve back in 2017. I'm from Ohio, just outside of Cleveland, and I was flying home after finishing up a semester at the University of Rochester. I had to stay at school a week after the semester ended for personal reasons, so I unfortunately spent Christmas relatively alone. The flight itself was fine, but I'd already been in a sour mood before I even boarded the plane. I'm a big Browns fan, and as I was at the airport, the Browns lost their final game of the regular season to go 0-16, completely winless. And as a lifelong fan, it was a special kind of misery. I think we were the first team to go winless since like the 80s or something. To top it off, my flight was delayed, which ruined my family's plans for the night. Originally, we were all supposed to drive to my cousin's house together for a New Year's Eve party and stay the night. But because of the delay, my parents decided to leave early, taking the main car. I was stuck driving the spare car alone. My mom tried to make it up to me by leaving Vera, our golden retriever, behind to keep me company. I wasn't thrilled about making the trip solo, but Vera was always good company. I figured I'd make the most of it. By the time my Uber dropped me off from the airport, it was creeping on 10 o'clock. I didn't even bother unpacking, I just jammed all my stuff in the car, got Vera, locked up the house, and got on the road. The drive itself wasn't anything special, just miles of Ohio backroads winding through empty fields and patches of forest. There wasn't much snow on the grounds, just a light dusting, which was nice since I hated driving in the snow. It was pitch black dark though. The only light came from my headlights and the occasional farmhouse with its porch light glowing faintly in the distance. About halfway into the trip, Vera started whining. At first, I thought she just wanted attention, but then she stood up, pacing in the passenger seat. That's when I realized she needed to go to the bathroom. I groaned, knowing there wasn't much else I could do but pull over. The next clearing I came across was small, barely enough space for the car, but it would have to do. I remember noting to myself how dark it really was out there. If not for the patches of white snow here and there, I probably wouldn't have been able to see into the woods at all. I jammed my hands in my pockets and tried my best not to freeze to death. Vera didn't seem to care about the cold or the darkness. Classic golden retriever. I let her out, not even bothering to leash her. She sniffed around the edge of the trees, taking her sweet time. She didn't wander far, just enough to do her business. And that's when I heard it. All of a sudden, a loud crashing sound echoed from somewhere in the woods. It wasn't just a branch breaking. It was heavier and deliberate, like someone or something was moving through the trees. I literally jumped from how loud it was. Imagine a grown man sprinting through the forest. That's genuinely what it sounded like. I scanned the darkness, squinting to make out anything, but it was too dark to see beyond the first few trees. Before I could react, Vera bolted directly into the woods. It was some worst nightmare type stuff, I'm telling you. She disappeared into the trees, and I lost sight of her in mere seconds. I yelled her name over and over, but she didn't come back. At that point, my heart was racing, and it started getting hard to breathe. The cold didn't help matters. I couldn't leave her out there, that wasn't an option. Without thinking, I ran into the woods blindly, yelling for her to come back. I didn't want to think about what she was chasing after, so I just ran, letting the adrenaline take over. The only light to aid me was my dim phone flashlight and the thin layer of snow on the ground. It was so dark I was practically running into the trees. I kept running, praying I'd find her before she caught up to whatever was in there. I ran until my lungs gave out from the cold, forcing me to take a break. After nearly falling over from exhaustion, I leaned up against a tree and felt myself about to break down. I honestly didn't know what to do. And then finally, I saw her. She was crouched low and shivering, walking slowly toward me. Her tail was tucked tightly between her legs. I had never seen her like that before. I dropped to my knees and embraced her. Relief flooded through me. She pressed against me and I could feel her body trembling. Something had terrified her. That's when I snapped back to reality and realized how serious the situation was. We were still in the middle of the woods, and there was still something out there. I sprung up from my position and told Vera to follow me. This time she obeyed and stuck by my side like her life depended on it. We started back to the car, but I had no idea if I was going the right way. As if things weren't bad enough, I damn near jumped out of my skin when I heard crashing from behind me. I didn't think, I just started running. Vera darted ahead of me and I followed her, praying I didn't trip. The crashing sound didn't stop this time. It seemed like it was following us. I can't even tell you how scared I was in that moment. I genuinely felt like I was going to die. By some miracle, Vera led me straight back to the car, and I practically threw her inside before slamming the door shut. As I was jumping in the driver's seat, I glanced back towards the woods, and my stomach dropped. There were 3 figures standing at the edge of the woods, watching us. I jammed the keys in the ignition and floored it out of there. I didn't stop, I didn't even slow down. I was still in shock. It wasn't until I'd driven a few miles that I noticed Vera was bleeding. I started panicking as I realized there was a cut just below her shoulder blade. Someone had stabbed her. I slammed on the brakes and ran around the car to the trunk. My mom always kept a first aid kit in every car, and for once, her insistence on being overly prepared paid off. I cleaned Vera's cut as best I could and wrapped it in gauze. She whimpered and I worried that I was hurting her, but I knew I was doing the right thing. For the first time since the whole sequence had started, I felt myself begin to relax. It was over. I tried not to think about it for the rest of the drive, but I was just so shell-shocked that something like that had happened to me. I ended up not telling my parents or relatives. I don't know why. It just felt like one of those things you keep to yourself. What I'm about to tell you is something I still think about often, especially during this time of year. This happened on New Year's Eve a few years ago. I was driving to my parents' house to celebrate the new year with them. They live a few hours away in upstate Pennsylvania, so I'd left in the late afternoon, figuring I'd get there with plenty of time to spare. The drive was supposed to be simple. I'm the type who really enjoys long drives, so a nice, peaceful drive would give me some much-needed time to think. But the weather had other plans. The snow started falling about an hour into my drive. At first it was light, just flurries dusting the windshield. Nothing to worry about. I thought the snowfall was actually quite pretty, but I'm pretty sure I jinxed myself. The further I drove, the harder the snow came down. It just kept falling and falling until I was literally in the middle of an honest-to-God blizzard. The highway turned slick and visibility dropped to almost nothing. My car, a little sedan, isn't exactly great in snow, so when the tires started slipping on even the smallest hills, I knew I had to pull over. There was no point in risking my life. It was my own fault for not planning out the drive better. I found a spot on the shoulder, far enough off the road to avoid passing cars, not that there were many. I texted my parents about my situation, and they seemed worried sick. I tried to reassure them that everything would be okay, but I honestly wasn't too sure about that myself. I figured I'd wait out the worst of the storm, hoping it would just ease up, but the snow didn't let up. In fact, it only seemed to get worse from that point. It just kept coming, piling up around the car and on the road ahead. After an hour or so, it became clear I wasn't going anywhere that night. My dad offered to try and get out to me, but I told him that that was a death wish. I told him that if the snow didn't let up, I'd call the police, which he begrudgingly accepted as a decent solution. I really didn't want to call the police, and I didn't have AAA either, so that wasn't an option. I told myself the storm would have to let up eventually, and I decided that if it didn't by the time I got tired, I'd call the police. The thought of spending the night in the car made me uneasy. I didn't want to run out of gas trying to keep warm, and I was worried about killing the battery if I kept the lights or heat on too long. I sat there, turning the engine on and off every so often, trying to conserve what I could. The wind howled outside. I was starting to feel the weight of the isolation when I looked at my rear view and saw headlights cutting through the storm from behind me. I literally wanted to jump for joy. A snowplow pulled up beside me. I was saved. I rolled down the window as the driver leaned out of his. He was an older guy, maybe in his late 50s. He looked nice. He was wearing a thick jacket and had a black knit hat that was pulled down over his ears. I remember thinking his face was really wrinkly, if that makes sense. It looked weathered, like he had spent decades in harsh conditions. I expected him to say something, but he just stared at me for what seemed like an unusual amount of time. Eventually, he spoke, asking me if I was okay. He had a really gruff voice, definitely a smoker, and it was honestly kind of off-putting. I told him that I didn't think my car could handle the conditions, trying to be friendly but also keep my voice steady. He nodded, saying that I wouldn't get far in a storm like this, especially with the car I had. He paused for a few moments, as if he were considering what to say. I watched his eyes scan my back seat, like he was looking for something. I was just about to respond when he offered to give me a ride. I hesitated. I didn't know him, and yeah, he seemed a little strange, but he struck me as a genuine guy. Plus, staying put with my car all night would have been stupid. I asked him if he could drive me to where I was going, and he said it would be no problem. I then asked him what I should do about my car, to which he shrugged his shoulders and said, "Leave it." After a moment, I agreed. I grabbed my bag and climbed into the cab of the plow. At first, the warmth was comforting. I felt the tension in my shoulders start to ease as I settled into the seat. He asked me where I was headed, and I told him about my parents' house. I gave him directions, and he nodded again, but didn't say much after that. The silence wasn't awkward, but as the minutes passed, I started to feel more and more uncomfortable. That's when I noticed something odd. He wasn't driving in the direction of my parents' house. I knew because the navigation was literally pointing in the opposite direction. I mean, we were on a local highway. There were only two ways to go. I tried my best to sound calm and asked him if we were going the right way in the most normal tone I could muster. I don't think I did a good job, though, because I could feel his demeanor slightly change with my question. Without looking at me, he told me we were taking a short detour and that the back roads would be better than the highway. I didn't know the area well enough to argue, but something about the way he said it made my stomach twist. We drove a little longer, and he did in fact get off the highway and start driving along some back road. At least the GPS said we were heading in the right direction. So I thought I was just being paranoid. Something in my gut was still telling me he was off though, so I started looking around the cab more closely. There were red flags everywhere. Empty liquor bottles rolled on the floor near his feet. There were torn up maps stuffed into the side pockets, and I caught a glimpse of a knife wedged between the seats. I felt my heart start pounding. You know that feeling where your heart just starts beating like crazy and you're worried other people can hear it? That's what was happening to me. By that time, I was also positive we weren't going the right way. The GPS kept recalibrating because he missed turn after turn, not even looking at it. I was panicking. As we continued driving, I spotted a house in the distance. It was the only one I'd seen for miles. I had to act. It felt like a lifeline. I waited until we got closer, took a deep breath, grabbed the door handle, and then kicked the door open as hard as I could. The cold air hit me like a slap, but I didn't stop. I slammed into the ground and felt my leg flare up with pain. I didn't care though. I got to my feet and started running toward the house. The man shouted something at me, and I glanced back to see him fumbling for something in the glove box, probably going for a gun for all I knew. I didn't look back again. I sprinted through the snow, trying not to slip until I reached the house. I pounded on the door, screaming for help. A man and woman opened it, and they basically pulled me inside. I collapsed onto the floor, trying to catch my breath. I told them what had just happened, and they didn't ask questions. They just called the police. By the time the cops arrived, the snowplow was gone. They said they'd keep an eye out and search the area, but in that storm, finding him was unlikely. They offered to give me a ride to my parents' house, and even helped me call someone to tow my car. I was beyond grateful. My dad was furious once he found out, and I haven't driven in the snow since. I always think about what might have happened had I not jumped out of the car when I did. I've never been one for parties, even in college. I got sick of the whole going out culture pretty quickly, and I found that I always had more fun doing something meaningful with a few close friends. I'm from a rural area, northwestern Ontario. This happened a couple years ago. Ever since I was a kid, my dad and his buddies had a New Year's Eve tradition of going ice fishing while everyone else was celebrating the New Year however they celebrated. My mom wasn't really in the picture, and we didn't have much extended family, so I grew up spending New Year's Eve on a frozen lake in the frigid cold with my dad, his brother, my brother, and my dad's friends. My dad isn't around anymore, and my brother moved to Chicago a number of years ago, but I still try and go ice fishing as much as possible, especially as a way to celebrate New Year's Eve. I'm not really sure why. I just feel like I have some kind of obligation to keep the tradition going. My two best friends, Nate and Trevor, are pretty rugged guys themselves. You know the type, those burly, lumberjack-looking dudes that seem more in touch with wilderness than society. That's honestly how I describe myself too. Anyway, the three of us tried to keep the tradition alive as best we could, which was great because spending New Year's Eve alone would be depressing as hell. Nate was the one driving that day. His truck was perfect for the job. Big tires, four-wheel drive, and enough room in the back for all of our gear. We'd packed everything we needed: rods, tip-ups, bait, a sled to haul everything, and a small pop-up shelter to shield us from the worst of the cold. The forecast predicted a clear night, but in Ontario, you never trust the weather reports entirely. We were prepared for anything. At least, we thought we were. The lake we were heading to wasn't a well-known spot, and that's what we loved about it. It was tucked away, surrounded by thick trees with a surface that stayed frozen solid even in the milder parts of winter. It wasn't a place you'd stumble across unless you knew exactly where to look. As Nate navigated the snowy back roads, the excitement started to build. There's something about the quiet stillness of ice fishing. Just you, your friends, and the promise of the catch. Definitely beats drinking beer after beer at some random bar. As we pulled up to park near the trailhead, I noticed someone standing nearby. He was a few yards away, bundled up in heavy winter gear. but something about him didn't feel right. He wasn't moving, just standing there, staring at our truck. At first, I thought maybe he was just a fellow angler sizing us up, but then I saw him glance down at his phone, then back at us, then back at his phone again. For some reason, it didn't feel casual. I don't really know how to explain it. It just felt off. I muttered to my friends that guy was creeping me out. The two of them looked up. Trevor shrugged his shoulders and Nate nodded but didn't say anything. We were about to start unloading when the man suddenly rushed towards us, waving his arms wildly. I rolled the window down to hear what he was saying. He started screaming that we needed to come help him immediately and that his buddy had just fallen through the ice. He pointed at his phone, saying the other guy they were with just told him. He sounded frantic, and his desperation was definitely real. We didn't even think. Trevor opened his door, and then we were all out following the man as he took off down the trail toward the lake. We didn't stop to grab anything, not even our coats. The urgency in his voice was enough to override any second thoughts. The man was practically sprinting, and we had to jog to keep up. As we got closer to the lake, I started to notice something that didn't sit right. He wasn't leading us to the usual fishing spots. Instead, we were heading toward a more remote part of the shoreline, away from where the ice was thickest. I was about to stop following, but it was too late. They appeared in view before we could do anything. Two more men standing near the edge of the lake. They weren't dressed for fishing, and they weren't moving. They were just standing there, waiting. I glanced down at their hands. They were both armed. My blood ran cold. One of them yelled at us to stop right there as we approached. He raised his gun and pointed it directly at me. I honestly can't describe the feeling that you get when someone points a gun at you. I hope no one ever has to experience what I felt that day. My heart dropped as the man we'd been following turned to face us, a smirk creeping across his face. We'd been set up. The second guy demanded Nate's keys, along with everything we had on our persons. We didn't really have a choice. These guys didn't seem like they were messing around. Nate reached into his pocket and tossed the truck keys to the man, and the three of us emptied our pockets. I tried to hang on to my phone, but one of the men told me phones too. Nate said his was in the car, which they laughed about. I've never been more furious in my life. How could we have been so foolish? I clenched my fists, wishing those guys weren't armed. I would have taken all of them on. Within moments, they grabbed everything and walked us back up the path at gunpoint before one of the men sped off in Nate's car. The other two backed away into the woods, presumably to their own vehicle. I debated following them, but I figured that wouldn't be much help. We stood there for a moment, shivering, before Nate pulled out his phone. I knew he had lied about it being in the car. I honestly don't know what we would have done had he not thought quickly on his feet. Somehow, we still had service. He called the police, explaining everything as calmly as he could. The dispatcher told us to stay put, and we huddled together for warmth as we waited for help to arrive. I was still so unbelievably angry. Nate was the worst, though. He kept kicking nearby trees and cursing at the top of his lungs. There was nothing Trevor or I could do to calm him down. The whole thing had happened so fast. I was honestly still processing it all. Why the hell would there be people out in the middle of nowhere on New Year's Eve of all days? It didn't make any sense. I'll skip all the boring details. The cops took an official report and were gracious enough to drive us all back to Trevor's house, which was the closest. As you might expect, Nate's car was never located, and those people were never caught. The three of us still can't believe what had happened. Trevor thinks we just stumbled into the wrong people at the wrong time. That they weren't planning on robbing us, but we just so happened to be the perfect targets. I think that's possible, but it still feels so unlikely. Who just springs a trap on some random people in the spur of the moment? But it also wouldn't make sense for them to be waiting for us at such a secluded spot. They had no guarantee anyone would show up. I really have no idea what to make of this whole incident.
There used to be a pond about half a mile away from my old house that I would commonly go fishing in. It was nicknamed Daryl's Pond. I still have no idea who Daryl was or why it was called that, but nobody owned it, so people would once in a blue moon go fishing there as well. It was usually me by myself though. I had dug a pole into the ground where I would tie a noose to and from my small kayak. I'd say it was about 3 in the afternoon when I rowed out to the middle of the pond, the sweet spot for getting a decent catch. There was another person coming out from the trees. I waved at him and gave him a smile. He hopped into a small boat floating by the edge of the pond and began to row over to me. As he got close enough where trying to speak to him wouldn't come off as obnoxious, I gave him a friendly, "Perfect day, isn't it?" "Yes, absolutely," he said. He didn't say anything after that, and I started to feel a bit awkward, as if I were obligated to keep some kind of conversation rolling now. "So, you come out here to throw some lines?" I asked. "No, I don't actually fish." "Oh, well, it's never a bad day to relax on the pond," I said. He continued to row closer to me until his boat collided with mine, creating a big thud. I was genuinely uncomfortable now. I didn't feel threatened, just weirded out. I was only 24 years old. This guy looked like he was late 40s or 50s. There was an awkward silence. I tried to just act like I was focused on trying to make a catch, but by now that wasn't even on my mind. This guy was weird. I didn't know what he wanted, and I was uncomfortable being so close to him. I felt him looking at me, or at least in my direction, as I faced halfway to the opposite direction of him. I took a quick glance to my right. Yeah, he was staring at me. I decided to be ballsy and lock eye contact with him. After about 4 seconds, he looked away. "So, where are you from?" I asked him. "Up there." He pointed behind himself, in the direction of the woodsy hill leading past the dirt road. "Oh, you live by Suffolk?" I asked. No, I'm not," he said. "What made you decide to come out here?" I said. "Why not?" I continued to try and uncomfortably fill the awkward silences that kept coming up. His responses were dry. He didn't contribute anything to what was barely a conversation. He just sat there not doing anything with half a smile on his face, looking either at me or in my general direction throughout. I was creeped out. My heart was racing at this point. I'd go as far as saying that I was nervous for my life. We were surrounded by trees in all directions in the middle of a pond. I started to row a bit closer to land, but in a very low-key kind of way, trying to play it off as me just trying to find a better spot to find some fish. I was horrified when I saw he was following me. "What a great day, huh?" I felt a shake in my voice. I got close enough to the edge of the pond where I finally told the man, "I think I'm gonna call it a day." I turned to see his reaction. He was still staring at me, but his smile was gone now. "I can't let you leave," he said. He lifted his flannel to expose a handgun sticking out of his jeans pocket. As soon as I could process what I was looking at, I dove out of the boat for land, ran the whole half-mile uphill through the woods back to my house, and locked every door and window as soon as I made it home. I pulled down the blinds to the dining room window, leaving it open just a crack for peeking outside undetected. It started to get dark out, and I left every light in the house off, still peeking out to the front yard, making sure I wasn't followed. The time came when I finally decided I wasn't followed. I realize now, like you, that not calling the police immediately was a huge mistake. I kept my bedroom windows open to let the room air out. My bedroom was on the 2nd floor, so I wasn't worried about being watched through the window. About half an hour after shutting the light and falling under the covers, I heard the sound of leaves crunching from outside. I sat up to hear it more clearly. It was definitely something walking around out there. Normally I would assume it was a deer or a bear, but after what just happened, I was still in paranoia mode. I sat up as still as a statue, except for my shaking out of fear, waiting as the sounds of the steps stopped. "Hey buddy, you up there?" Are you trying to sleep? Sorry, I didn't mean to wake you. I felt like 100 pounds just fell directly onto my chest. It was the same voice. I knew it right away. I didn't make a sound. I crept out of the room quietly downstairs to the kitchen and grabbed the phone, practically crawling on my way out to avoid being seen through the open blinds. I called 911 like I should have earlier in the temporary safety of my bedroom. I made sure to whisper into the phone as I was still hoping that he hadn't yet heard or spotted me. 20 minutes felt like an hour as I sat behind my bed, waiting for the police to arrive in constant fear that I would hear glass breaking from downstairs, or a thud on the back door, or even just a voice again from down below my window outside. The police did a thorough investigation of the property in nearby woods, turning up nothing. They suggested I stay with a friend or a family member for a few days, and so I did. I never heard from or saw the man again, but I still moved a month later. I couldn't deal with the constant fear and paranoia of being watched through my windows. I feel much more comfortable fishing out by the bay now. There was this one time I joined my brother-in-law Jack on a fishing trip with him, a couple of his friends, and my sister. He came from money, so he always had an easy life, and ever since my sister married him, it's been the same for her. I packed everything I would need to spend the night on his boat in a small backpack. I drove out to the wealthier side of town by his house, which was by the bay. He lived right by the water, like it was actually in his backyard. He even had a small pre-built wooden dock leading to his luxurious boat with the name Lexi painted on, which is my sister's name. He was inspired by Forrest Gump to do that. He's living the dream life, that much I'm sure. We set sail early in the morning. He had packed tons of food and snacks, lots of hamburger meat because unsurprisingly, they had installed a barbecue onto the boat. They have always had to have everything that cost money, and it's always been infuriating. To be honest, a few hours into the trip, it wasn't even as fun as I thought it would be. Only one largemouth bass had been caught, and that was of course by Jack. They were all getting really drunk. I tried to persuade my sister to let me drink, but she kept scolding me, saying no, since I was only 17 at the time. She was always a nagging buzzkill, and at that moment, I was questioning why I even agreed to go with them. The only part of the trip I was enjoying was being able to relax and tan on the back deck of his unnecessarily large boat. The sky started to turn a beautiful orange as the sun began to set. Jack put the burgers on the grill, which to me seemed odd. 3 fish had been caught by that time, which would have been a perfect, more appropriate dinner, but I would definitely prefer burgers over fish, so I didn't complain. By the time we were done eating, it was dark out. There was something so calming yet unsettling about being in the middle of the ocean at night. It's almost like being in space. Nothing around you as far as the eye can see, and without your vessel, you'd be as good as dead. They were all insanely drunk and or high by now, blasting music and screaming and laughing. They eventually invited me to play Cards Against Humanity with them inside, so I did. I didn't have anything else to do anyway. There was an extra beer sitting on the counter by the small bar, so I just grabbed it. I was long past the point of caring now, and my sister was not in a state of mind to be nagging me anymore. About 3 beers in, I was finally able to loosen up and enjoy myself with a decent buzz. I had to lower the music a good amount earlier because I couldn't even hear myself talking. Jack and his buddies were completely shit-faced now. My sister was drunker than I'd ever seen her, but she wasn't quite as bad as them. It was fine though, they were all adults trying to have a good time, safe and secluded on a boat in calm waters, far from any land where they could cause anyone any harm. But things took a horribly unexpected turn. Over the now much lower music, me and one of Jack's friends noticed a noise coming from outside. I turned off the music completely. There was the sound of 2 men calling for help from outside. We all rushed outside, or at least I rushed, to the side of the boat. There, over the ledge, was a much smaller boat with 2 Indian men looking up at us. I asked them what the problem was. One of them told us they were out of food and gas and needed help. I looked at everyone else. I didn't feel too good about this situation, but everyone else was not even close to a correct state of mind where they should be making important decisions. I felt like I had the burden of deciding what to do. Jack told them to wait there while he went to get the ladder. He tripped on his way and dropped his bottle of beer. I figured I would hate myself if I chose not to help two stranded seagoers, so I helped Jack in carrying the ladder over to the edge and hooking it to the railing. The two men climbed up on board and thanked all of us. Jack, my sister, and their friends couldn't even speak coherent sentences to the two men, so I had to apologize and told them they had a little too much to drink. The two men didn't even seem to acknowledge my statement. They looked at Jack and asked him if we had any extra food. We led them inside to the kitchen. Jack grabbed the leftover burgers from the counter and they shoveled them down. I didn't feel right about this situation. It made me uncomfortable. Jack clumsily handed them a jerry can full of gasoline, and the two men thanked us before climbing back down the ladder. I felt better now. We all went to sleep after that. Jack and my sister got the bedroom, while me and their two friends had to sleep on the pull-out cot and couches. I was rolling around the rock-hard couch for about an hour trying to get some sleep. I eventually had to get up to get a drink and use the bathroom. Jack told us to pee into the ocean to conserve the water on the boat. I opened the door expecting nothing but the sound of the calm water splashing, but instead, I heard the faint sound of a boat motor, along with the splashing of water that would come with a sailing boat. The pitch blackness surrounding the boat prohibited me from finding the source of the sound. I hopped up top by the controls and flipped on the switch for the searchlight. The beam of light provided the perfect amount to search the surrounding waters. Nothing so far. I turned it 90 degrees. Nothing. 180 degrees. Nothing. Then I reached about 3/4 of a whole spin around, and there was the boat from before. It was coming closer. And at that exact moment, I heard the gut-wrenching, blood-curdling scream of one of the guys from below. I jumped all the way back down to deck level and ran back inside. One of Jack's friends was standing in the corner of the room, while the other was sitting up in reaction to the scream. That was followed by Jack and my sister bursting out of the bedroom to see what was going on. He formed a barely audible sentence, saying he saw two figures standing over him. They apparently ran out the front door to the deck. We all ran to see if they were still there, but they were nowhere in sight. I pointed them in the direction of where I saw the boat. The searchlight was still aimed in that exact position, but by then the boat was already gone. We never managed to find them after that. We searched high and low for what they could have stolen. All that we found was missing were a couple of cans of gasoline and Jack's wallet and keys, which he had left on the kitchen table. We had to speed all the way back to Jack's house that night. It took 4 hours to make it back, but nobody had broken in. He used the spare key hidden in the backyard to get inside. Jack and my sister had the lock changed the next day. The scary part, a few weeks ago, their camera systems caught two suspicious men wearing hoods walk up to their front door and seemingly attempt to unlock it, but failing, then quickly running off. We're 99% sure it was them. I was 21 years old and I was fishing with my 84-year-old grandfather for the first time. We took an hour-long drive from our suburban home to a more desolate part of the state. He always went fishing in this one particular lake that no one knew about, where he always managed to leave with coolers full of fish. My grandpa was a hardcore fisher, I'll say that right now. I never even knew there were different terms for the steps of fishing. He was throwing terms at me that I didn't understand left and right, even during the car ride there, which finally ended when we veered off the main quiet road and down about 2 miles of dirt trails. He parked his Jeep at the side of the trail, and from there we lugged a small boat through some dense forest. At 84 years old, my grandpa was no weakling. In fact, I was becoming exhausted from carrying the boat, but I didn't want to show him that by asking to stop for a break, because that would just be humiliating if he could lift it longer than I could. I'll skip ahead to when we were actually sitting in the boat fishing. So he just got done showing me how to actually get the line and the hook in the water. After that, he didn't say a thing. He seemed to be concentrating really hard on what he was doing. I turned around to ask him a question. He seemed to be leaning in, focusing on something in the water. He didn't respond to my question, so I just resumed concentration on the water. I turned around like 20 seconds later out of curiosity, and he was leaning even closer now. I thought something was wrong with him. I put my hand on his shoulder, and that's when I heard splashing sounds. My grandpa seemed to push something back into the water, and then yelled at the top of his lungs for me to paddle as fast as I could back in the direction we came. My heart was racing. I didn't know what happened, but I knew it was something bad. As soon as the boat hit the dirt, my grandpa was moving as fast as he could off the boat and back to the car. We left the boat and equipment behind. When we got to the car, he stepped on it down the trails. All the while I was screaming at him to answer me, to tell me what happened. He seemed to have to gather his thoughts before finally, 10 minutes into the drive, saying, "I was looking down into the water. I knew I saw something. It kept getting closer to the surface. It became clearer as it got closer, and I could swear I saw what looked like a face. And then it got even closer, and as I was leaning in to get a better look, something reached out and grabbed a hold of me." That was the most I could get out of him until a few weeks later when he tried his best to describe what he saw, and from the description he gave, I remember it sounding almost like he was describing a human face. Almost. Perhaps I remember best his single sentence. All I know is, it wasn't no fish.
I live in the state of Washington, in the Pacific Northwest. I used to work at a late-night diner on the side of the highway. I was 29 years old. I worked the closing shift pretty often. The diner would close at 2 a.m., which was incredibly late considering how scarcely populated the area is. But even so, given the proximity to the highway, there would usually be at least 1 or 2 customers in the building until closing time. Having grown up in the South and moved up here, I can tell you the people are different. In the South, there's a huge emphasis on hospitality and small talk. But up here, people here are kind, but not overly friendly. I feel like the air lends itself more to introversion. I used to be a waitress down south, and I'm telling you from experience, the customers were a lot chattier down there. Up here, people seem to want to keep to themselves a little more. This was approaching closing time. The kitchen's last call was at 2 technically, even though the diner was advertised to close at 2. It was really frowned upon if a customer would come in and order something that late, but it did happen. It happened that night, as a matter of fact. There were only 2 employees in the building, myself and the chef. It was like 1:50 a.m., and in comes a lone, heavy-set man. He was wearing awkwardly high jeans, a gray shirt tucked in, a brown jacket, and he had a brown mustache and glasses. I asked him if he'd like to sit at the bar or a table, and he asked for a table. He kept smiling the whole time, so I smiled back. I gave him a menu and informed him the kitchen closes in 10 minutes. He looked at the menu for a few seconds, and then said he'd like a black coffee and some French toast. Around this time, he also introduced himself as Nolan. Luckily, his order was simple enough. I went into the kitchen and told the chef the order, who still had a slightly annoyed face in reaction, which I just responded to with, "I know." I stepped back out to the dining area, and Nolan waved me over. As I neared, he struck up a conversation with me, something rather unusual for folk around here at this hour. He asked me if I was from the area, and started complaining about all the potholes in the road around here. I responded, yeah, it's all the freezes we get in the winter. Basic small talk. I did tell him that I'm from around here, and he perhaps pressed a bit too specifically about where I was from. I told him a vague, general area. I never tell people exactly where I live, obviously. He said he just moved to town not too long ago. As he spoke, I analyzed his body language and character in general. He seemed like a somewhat nerdy older guy, and this may have been his idea of flirting. Didn't bother me much though. I dealt with it back home in the South all the time, so I was used to it. Since this was the last customer of the night, the chef personally came out and placed his food on the counter. I went to grab it and bring it to Nolan. By this point, he had his food and coffee, and everything else was about ready to close up shop. I wiped down the counters and tables and everything already. I stayed behind the counter, a little further away from Nolan, because I was tired of conversing with him. My social energy was drained, and I was ready to get home and go to sleep. When he finally finished his food, I went to drop off his check before he even asked for it, politely, non-verbally implying that we were closed and we wanted to get home. He paid by card, and then he left. The chef would be the one closing up the place, so after cleaning Nolan's table and gathering all my belongings, I said goodbye to the guy working in the kitchen and walked out to my car. There were 3 cars in the lot, mine, the chef's, and a third one that I couldn't explain. It was a silver, older-looking car, like a 2005 Toyota or Audi or something. I wasn't sure. I also couldn't tell if the windows were tinted or if it was just so dark out that I couldn't see into the car. But I wasn't able to tell if someone was in the car or not. It was parked on the dirt closest to the highway. I wondered if it was Nolan's car. I got in my car and started heading home. The diner to my home is about 20 minutes. I was on the highway when a ding came from my dashboard and the tire pressure screen popped up. I started freaking out. I didn't know how to change a tire. I'd never even called my roadside assistance company. I was still a decent way from home. The tire pressure to my rear passenger side tire was dropping rather rapidly all of a sudden, from 20 down to 10, and then I started feeling not just the steering wheel shake, but the entire car shake. I had to pull off the road. I came to a stop and got out of the car real quick to look at the tire, and it was as flat as could be. Suddenly, as if they were just flicked on, a pair of headlights lit up the side of the road as it approached me, then slowing to a stop. I hurried back inside my car and locked the door. I truly didn't know what to do. And then there was a light tap at my window. I looked up and saw Nolan, the man from the restaurant. He waved at me with a smile. He was wearing gloves now. For the sake of the story, I'll use a fake name for myself. Nolan said through the window, "Kathy, is that you? Are you okay?" He laughed, acting like it was such a coincidence. I felt a knot in my stomach suddenly. I instantly knew he did this. I'm not a dumbass. He motioned for me to lower the window. I lowered it literally maybe 2 inches, just enough to speak through. He asked if I needed help. I told him I had a flat tire. He played dumb, asking me which one. I said the back passenger side. He started walking over to the other side, and at this moment, I dialed 911 on my phone. I let the phone sit on my lap as Nolan walked back to my side. He said through the window with his creepy smile that he knows how to change a flat. He asked me to step out of the car, and I said I'm waiting for my boyfriend to come and help me change it. During all of this, I heard the 911 operator speaking into the phone, but it wasn't loud enough for Nolan to hear it. I tried to make it as clear as possible my situation to the operator without being too obvious for Nolan to catch on. I basically said, "I'm not sure how I got a flat, but I'm waiting for my boyfriend to come help me change it. Thanks for offering to help, sir." He stood there for a second with a much less friendly look on his face. Then he walked away from the window. I took this opportunity to speak very quietly into the phone that this man slashed my tire and he's trying to get me out of the car. The operator asked my location, and I quickly opened the map on my phone and told her the name of the road I pulled off onto. The deafening shattering of glass immediately to my left made me scream as shards of glass fell onto my lap. I screamed at the top of my lungs at the man, "I'm on the phone with the police. It's the police," as I showed him the phone screen. He looked at my screen and then reached inside the car. I screamed again at the top of my lungs as I was hysterically crying, expecting him to try and grab me or choke me, but instead, he grabbed my phone and launched it in the direction of the highway. He then ran back to his car and sped off down the dark road. I heard the screeching of his tires as he made a sharp right turn and then disappeared. I wanted to go look for my phone, but with no flashlights in the car, I'd be running out there to look in the pitch dark. The only light was from my car. I had no choice but to wait and pray that Nolan, or whatever his real name was, didn't come back. I'm very grateful that I was able to tell the 911 operator my location in time. I heard the unmistakable sound of police sirens in the distance, and I started to cry tears of joy when I realized they were getting closer. I got out of my car and started waving my arms in the air until I saw the flashing lights turn off the highway onto this random road. Pretty soon a second police car showed up, and then a third. During all this time, we found my phone, which was completely destroyed. I described the man to them along with his car, and pointed the direction in which he went. One of the police officers left in that direction, as they also put the word out on their radio. They were honestly the nicest cops I'd ever met in my life. They changed my tire for me, and one of them even gave me an escort home, having me follow from behind. The main officer told me that they would investigate the video surveillance from the diner and keep me updated with any news. I got a call a week later from that officer, informing me that the investigation was still ongoing based on the surveillance footage. That was the last I'd heard of it. I don't think they caught him, sadly. I never returned to that diner job again after that night. I was not risking that man ever finding me again. I'm a 15-year-old guy working at an amusement park in upstate New York. This only happened a year ago, and it still gives me chills thinking about it. It was a crisp October Sunday, one of the last few days the park would be open until it closed until May. It seemed like just another normal day at work. Boy, was I wrong. After checking in and working at my station for about 5 hours, I looked at my watch. 4:55 p.m. was the time. My shift ended in 5 minutes. I felt relieved and exhausted. As I began packing up my things, a man with a scraggly beard and messy hair approached me. He was wearing a gray t-shirt with a few stains on it and black sweatpants covered in holes. I thought to myself, I just need to get through this last one. "Can I help you?" I asked the man. He stared at me for a few seconds, and then he kept turning his head as if someone were following him. I was starting to get a little creeped out. "Sir, can I help you?" I repeated my question, starting to sound a little annoyed. He looked at me for a couple seconds, and finally responded, saying with a stutter, "Where are your bathrooms?" He said this in a whisper tone of voice. "Up the hill to the right," I responded cheerfully. The man started to walk in that direction. As he did, he kept turning and looking at me. I avoided eye contact, even though I was more freaked out than ever. Next thing I knew, one of my coworkers came to take my spot. I grabbed my things, practically sprinted through the park to the back room to punch out of my shift, and then to the bathroom. I changed out of my work clothes and headed to the employee parking lot. I sat on a bench and waited for my coworker Jordan, who was 17, to pick me up. After waiting for what seemed like hours, Jordan finally picked me up. Before going home, we went to the local diner to eat some cheeseburgers for dinner. While eating in the diner, I noticed something odd. The same man who I helped find the bathrooms at the park was at the diner, sitting a couple tables down, staring right at me. My heart skipped a beat. I told Jordan about it, and he just shrugged it off. "Probably just a coincidence, Ben, don't worry." "Yeah," I said, even though I was pretty concerned. After dinner, we got back in the car and started the 35-minute drive back home. At the first red light we came to, I saw something that made my heart skip another beat. There, sitting in his white Honda to the right of us, the man from the park and diner. Sure enough, he was staring back at me. I told Jordan, and he started to worry a little. After arriving to our street, we made sure to take a couple laps around the block to make sure that man wasn't following us. Once it was clear, Jordan dropped me off at home. My mom and sister were out at the mall, and my dad was on a business trip, so I was home alone. After immediately jumping into bed, I heard a noise at my window. I slowly got up and looked outside, and saw something that will forever send chills down my spine. Right there on my front lawn was the man, looking right at my window, smiling. I immediately grabbed my phone and called 911, but once the police arrived, the man was gone. I immediately quit my job at the amusement park right after the park closed for winter. I haven't seen the man since this incident. This was an experience that I'll never forget. I was working a late-night shift at the diner I worked at for a year. It was a rainy night. In fact, it was pouring. Nights like these usually meant less customers because people aren't exactly rushing to drive in the rain. I was expecting a slow night. It was for the most part. I was working until midnight. At some point closer to the end of my shift, in came a man and a woman significantly younger looking than him. He looked about 40. She looked like she were in her 20s. They both looked at me the second they walked in, and so I went over to greet them and ask how many. They said just 2. so I brought them to a table. They took a while to order, and I noticed they were talking really quietly to each other. After they did order, the man started striking up a conversation with me. I'm a generally talkative person, which was why I've always thrived in the hospitality industry, so I started chatting their ears off since it was a slow night anyway. Typical waitress-customer back and forth. The girl oddly didn't say much. The man did most of the talking, so I started directing my questions more to him. I can't remember every last thing we said to each other, obviously, but one thing that stuck in my head was when the man asked me, "Do you live alone?" I did live alone, and still do live alone. I answered his question honestly, saying I live about 10 minutes north up the road, and that it's really quiet and boring around here. At the time, I didn't see his question as any kind of red flag, albeit maybe a bit strange of a question, but something about a man being with another female makes you automatically assume they're not a threat. I made jokes about being stuck here forever and such, and then walked away from the table. I'd say about 45 minutes later, they finished and left. Fast forward probably an hour later, and we were closing up the place. I said goodbye to my coworkers and rushed to my car to avoid getting more soaked than I needed to from the rain. It was still pouring outside. I drove home slow because of the conditions. The second I got home, I ran straight to the front door and let myself in. I didn't even notice that neither of the other tenants' cars were parked outside. My living situation was the middle floor of a home with 3 apartments in it. There's a side entrance with a stairway that has an entrance to all 3 floors. My being on the first floor meant that I could enter through the front door. After setting my keys and stuff down on the kitchen counter, there was a manic pounding at the front door. It was nearly 1 a.m. I had no idea who it could be besides maybe one of the other tenants in the house. There's 2 doors, the glass storm door and the inner door. I always keep both locked for safety. I opened the inner door and saw a girl on the other side of the storm door. She was drenched. She was wearing a gray sweater with the hood up, partially obscuring her face. She begged me through the door to let her in so she could use a phone. Before doing that, I first had to feel her out, of course. I asked her if she's lost. She replied that a creepy man was following her around and she needed help. Something about this girl, though, was strikingly familiar. I asked her who the man was and where he was. She turned around and then said, "I don't know." She kept begging me to open the door. She even tried opening it herself. I then realized why she looked familiar. She looked like the girl from the diner that was with that man. So I asked her straight up, "Weren't you at my diner before?" She didn't acknowledge my question. Maybe she didn't hear me, but she turned around once again and started freaking out, pounding on the door, saying, "There he is." I looked beyond her to the street, and I saw a large man slowly walking towards the house. As the man slowly got closer, the girl kept looking at me with a look that would imply she's more confused than anything as to why I'm not opening the door. The man got close enough for me to realize I was right. It was that man from the diner, and this was the girl sitting with him at the diner. I think she saw it in my eyes the moment I realized, and she turned to the man and screamed, "Go!" The man started charging at the door, and I slammed the inner door shut and locked it. I didn't hear any kinds of knocks or bangs. I wasn't about to open the door again to check if they were still there, though. I went to the stairway to go upstairs and knock on the upstairs tenant's door. The stairway is separated from the 3 apartments by a door on each level. After knocking a bunch of times, nobody answered. I tried the same thing at the downstairs door. No answer either. This was when I looked out the windows and realized none of their cars were here tonight. I was alone in the house. I went back up to my apartment and then locked the stairway door. My mind was racing, conjuring up possible explanations. The most obvious explanation was that it was a trap to get me to open the door so that they could rob me, or worse. It suddenly made sense why that man asked me if I lived alone. I had to just sit on the couch for a few minutes and think. All I could hear was the sound of the pouring rain outside. I thought about calling the police, but chose not to in that moment. After a few minutes, I went to the bathroom to brush my teeth and get ready for bed, when I heard a knocking sound. I left the bathroom to listen, and I was right. It was a knocking sound. It was coming from the stairway door. I walked over to it, thinking it was one of the tenants. I said, "Who is it?" There was no verbal response, but whoever it was knocked again. I said both of the other tenants' names. No response. The only thing I could say is, if you don't identify yourself, I'm calling the police. I practically screamed it. They heard me for sure. They knocked once again. So I yelled, "What do you want?" And a voice from the other side said, "Your blood on me." I ran to my room and locked myself inside and called the police. I hid in my closet while I was on the phone, and I stayed in there. The sounds of the rain, wind, and thunder outside constantly startled me. I worried about any little sound coming from inside the house. It was the longest 10 minutes of my life before I was told to let the police inside the house at the front door. They wrote a report of everything. They checked the front and backyard. Then they suggested I find another place to sleep for a few nights. I took that advice and packed a bag real quick while they were there, and then left to drive to my parents' house for the night. I returned the next day to the house. There was a knock at the stairway door, and this time it was actually my neighbor from upstairs. I opened the door, and he pointed at the door and asked, "What's this about?" I was horrified to see a message on the door saying, "Thanks for the service, Beth." It was written in marker. I couldn't stay there for a while. I had to stay with my parents for a few weeks until this blew over. I got a new apartment pretty close by the following month. Better safe than sorry. This video's theme is restaurant stories because of today's sponsor, Factor 75, which is a service that lets you skip all the shopping, cooking, and cleaning by delivering fresh, never frozen, dietitian-approved meals right to your doorstep. Factor's meals are ready in just 2 minutes, so all you have to do is heat and enjoy, then get back to your daily routine. And if you're looking for calorie-conscious options during the busy fall season, you can try delicious, dietitian-approved calorie smart meals with around or less than 550 calories per serving. Factor also offers Gourmet Plus meals as part of your weekly options, which is perfect if you're craving something a little more special with your meal plan. With Gourmet Plus meals, you'll get a side of premium produce like broccoli and broccolini to go along with your choice of protein. And keep an eye out for Surf and Turf meal options coming soon. I personally love to cook, but sometimes finding the time to cook and food shop is a luxury. So for me, Factor has made life easier and gives me more time to do other things and stick to my goals. If you're interested, head to factor75.com or click the link in the description and use code NIGHTMARE50 to get 50% off your first Factor box. When I was 25, I went on a solo trip to Rio de Janeiro. My favorite DJ would be there that weekend, and I always wanted to go anyway. I've traveled solo many times in my life and never had any issues. Airbnbs aren't expensive a little outside of the city, and the one I was staying at was very nice and comfortable. It was its own little one-floor house, but the whole inside was very modern and clean. The Friday that I landed, I unpacked at the Airbnb, grabbed dinner, and went to the rooftop venue where the DJ would be performing. The first day and night all went well, and I met some really cool people at the rooftop. James, Ethan, and Jess. Ethan and Jess were dating. James, I guess, was third wheeling on the trip. The next day, I met up with them as they were also on a trip here. We got brunch together, then we checked out some of the sights together, like the Christ Redeemer and Sugarloaf Mountain, and then we hit the beaches. Unfortunately, they had tickets that they had already bought to another show that night, which I couldn't go to. So I was back to my solo ventures, which was fine. I still found things to do. Eventually, when I was hungry, I walked back in the direction of the Airbnb towards the outside of the city. On the way back, I stopped at a restaurant I found. I can speak a little Portuguese, but I'm by no means fluent. So I tried to keep to places where people seemed to speak English while I was alone. The menu on the window had some English writing, so I went inside. This restaurant was kind of small and dark. A lot of the restaurants in the area were expensive, but this one seemed affordable, so I stayed. The dining space was very long and narrow. It wasn't really busy. There were a few people sat further down at a couple tables. Then there was a man seated at a table basically next to mine. He was about 50. I wondered if he was another tourist. He and I were the only two people seated alone in here. The server came over and initially spoke in Portuguese, and I asked in Portuguese if he speaks English, and he said yes. From there on, I ordered in English. I noticed the man at the other table, looking over, watching as I ordered. It was kind of weird. When the server walked away after taking my order, the man said in English with a Portuguese accent that my Portuguese sounded good. I said thank you, and he started talking to me in Portuguese, as if giving me a lesson. I think he thought he was coming off as charming, but it was annoying and creepy. I kept looking down at my phone to act distracted, but he'd keep talking to me, both in English and in Portuguese. I'd humor him to be nice and not create awkwardness, and I tried my best to converse with him in Portuguese, as he'd correct my mistakes while trying to speak. The conversation was basically where I'm from, why I'm here, what I did today, and where I'm staying. I kinda just made up that I'm staying with a friend. What really creeped me out was when he told me how sexy I am when I talk in Portuguese. I was hoping he was leaving soon, but a part of me died inside when I saw the waiter bring him his food. Luckily, my food didn't take long. I got some pork stew dish. The man asked how it was. I told him fine. He stopped talking as much now that he was eating, thank God. I ate quickly. When I was done, I hurriedly asked for the check just because I didn't want to converse with this man anymore. The man also asked for the check right after I did, which I found so annoying and strange. He wasn't even done eating. Once I paid, I got up and walked out. The man said something in Portuguese, but all I said was bye and kept walking. It was dark out now, and the streets were a little less lively. I was walking for a while when I came to an intersection. While waiting to cross, I noticed the man from the restaurant across the street. He was definitely looking at me, but looked away the opposite direction when I noticed him. Maybe he had to walk the same way. It wasn't that unlikely. I continued to walk back, and as I was getting closer, I kept turning back just to see if he was still in sight. He wasn't. I arrived to the Airbnb. I got to the front door and looked around one more time, and I noticed way down the block, that man standing on the corner by the intersection. He was staring in this direction. I felt my heart drop. He was following me. I let myself inside the house and locked the door. Then I closed all the blinds. Now he knew where I was staying. I panicked and called my dad and told him. He told me to just be alert and make sure everything is locked, and to maybe keep a knife by me. It was a Saturday night, and my flight wasn't until late the next day, so I did want to go out. Eventually, I called an Uber to a bar in the downtown area, and I went to a venue having a house music night. I was there for maybe a couple hours before calling an Uber back to the Airbnb. When I got back, I let myself into the house kind of drunk. I sat down on the couch just to relax for a bit, but I noticed something. I heard the sound of the outside, and then I saw the blinds to one of the windows blowing from the breeze. The window in the kitchen was open. I had all the windows shut because the air conditioning was running. I immediately knew to get up and leave the house quickly. I called the emergency number and did my best to articulate to the operator in Portuguese that there was a home break-in. The police showed up in a matter of minutes, and I came out from behind the bush I was hiding in across the street when they did. One of the police officers did speak a little bit of English, so I was able to tell him that the window was opened and I was being followed earlier. The police entered the house and yelled things I didn't understand. The moment I saw them walking outside with a man from the restaurant in handcuffs was the most shocking moment of my life. The mix of emotions I felt, disbelief yet relief, but also horrified. If I hadn't called the cops, if I had gone into the bedroom where he was probably hiding, I didn't even want to think about it. He was taken away, and I never had to see his ugly, creepy face again. I'm glad he was stupid enough to not close the window behind him. I should have listened to my dad and locked all the windows as well. I just never imagined he would actually climb through one, though. I left the next day, and haven't returned to Brazil since. It was the holidays. Most of my friends were away, so I had decided to look for a part-time job to earn a bit of money. After waiting around for about a week, I finally got a call from a nearby restaurant asking me to come in for a trial. I had a fair bit of waitering experience, so I wasn't too surprised when the owner offered me the position. The place had a really creepy atmosphere to it. It was small, dimly lit, and every so often, a terrible smell would circulate through the air. It wasn't somewhere I would have usually gone for, but I needed the money and kept reminding myself that I'd only be here until college started back up. Anyway, it was around 10 p.m., and I was out the front by myself, cleaning the cutlery while I waited for the last table to leave. It was a table of 4 big guys. They were pretty rough looking. In fact, if I passed them on the street, I would have assumed they were homeless. Half an hour passed, and they finally got up to leave. I smiled as one of them came to the register to pay. "That's $42.50 altogether," I said. He immediately handed over a bunch of crinkled notes with a big grin on his face. Unfortunately, I had seen this kind of look before, and braced myself for the cheesy pickup line. He said to me, "You doing anything tonight, cutie?" bringing himself closer to the register. "Thank you, have a good night," I replied, trying to make it clear that I was not interested. He laughed and walked out the door, mumbling something under his breath as he went. As soon as he was out of sight, I quickly cleared the dishes, cleaned down, and got changed out of my staff uniform. I waved goodbye to the last kitchen hand as I walked out the door and into the night. My house was only a couple of blocks away, so every night I walked to save gas. I had only walked for about 5 minutes when a loud whistle startled me. I looked off into the direction it came from and froze in fear. It was the same guy from the restaurant. He was on the opposite side of the street, signaling for me to come over with a large grin on his face. I took a pause before my instincts kicked in, and I started to quickly walk away. My house was still about 10 minutes away, and I could feel him getting closer with every step. Terrifying thoughts were racing around in my head, knowing very well that this could end badly. I turned the corner and started to sprint down the footpath. I felt tears gather up in my eyes as loud footsteps followed closely behind me. I didn't look behind out of fear, when all of a sudden a hand firmly grabbed my shoulder and yanked me backwards. I turned to see the man. His face was red, and his grin had morphed into a furious expression. He put his finger up to his lips. "Don't scream or I'll cut you," he whispered. At this point, I was ready to accept my fate, when out of nowhere, I felt a sudden burst of rage explode inside of me. I grabbed his face and dug my nails deep into his eyes. The man let out a loud, horrible noise as he clenched his face in pain. I took this chance and made a run for it. I ran all the way back to my flat, and after struggling to put the key in the door, I managed to get inside. As soon as I shut the door, I collapsed down onto the ground out of exhaustion and started to cry. My roommates all rushed down the stairs to see if I was okay. After walking me to a couch, I explained what happened. They were all shocked, whilst at the same time happy to see that I escaped from the man. I rang up the restaurant and quit the next day. It was a shame, really. The owners were so kind, and I really didn't mind the place. But I was too terrified to return, knowing that that man could be waiting for me. I've started back at college now, and I'm slowly recovering from that incident. Sometimes I do get nightmares just thinking about what may have happened if I hadn't attacked that man like I did. I was 19 and strapped for cash, so I temporarily took a second job working as a waitress at a diner. It was open till 3 a.m. on weeknights and 24 hours on the weekends. On the weekends, it was always a bunch of drunk kids at night that would come after they left the bars. During the week, most people that came late night were people working overnight shifts or just getting off from work. I would do the overnight shifts twice a week. Anything more than that, I probably would have passed out from a lack of sleep. I'd be the only server past 10 o'clock on the weekdays because there wasn't an abundance of customers, especially at the later hours of the night. One night, a larger man came in alone, around like 1 a.m. There was only one other customer in the restaurant at the time, I believe. I seated him. He started talking to me in a flirtatious way right away. It was always the older, unattractive ones that would be the most flirty. I had to deal with it with a smile though, as I basically was working on tips. He ordered a burger and a milkshake. Then he told me his name, Trevor. Trevor would keep staring at me from across the diner as I would be sitting doing things on my phone. He was the only customer left at this point now. He called me by my name over to the table. I went over with a smile and he asked for the check. He left after paying, and when I went to collect the tip and clean the table, I noticed along with the $5 tip, he left his number and a winking face on the bill. Gross. I crumpled it up and threw it away. I thought that was the end of Trevor and I's story, but it wasn't. A few nights later, in came Trevor again, super late at night when no one else was in the place. I greeted him and sat him to a table. He actually hit me with a "how's my favorite server doing tonight?" which was odd considering I only served him one time. He again started some conversation with me, and I was way too exhausted for this, but I had to put a smile on my face and entertain it. I thought maybe this time he'd give a better tip if I acted interested, but that backfired because he mistook my friendliness as interest and invited me to come on his boat sometime. I asked what kind of boat it is to play along, and he showed me a picture of this tiny little thing that could barely fit 2 people based on the looks of it. I said, "Oh wow, my dad has a boat too." I should have said boyfriend looking back now, but I was trying to get a good tip out of him. He asked for my number, and I told him I'm not allowed to give customers my number. I could get fired. He actually believed this, but after he left, he once again left his number on the bill, this time with a note saying something along the lines of, "I bet you were just shy last time. Don't be shy this time, you can text me. It'll be our little secret," followed by another winking face. He again only tipped $5. This guy was a creep who didn't even tip well. I hope to not see him again. But this wouldn't be a story if I didn't. He came in the next week on another night I was working. It had to be like 2 a.m., and it seemed like he'd always come in right as the place would become empty. Almost like he was sitting in the parking lot, waiting to come when I wouldn't be serving any tables. This time he came in, and the first thing he said was, "You don't call her, right?" But he didn't say it with a smile, he said it with a serious face. I told him I'm really flattered, but I really can't text customers. He didn't say anything, he just walked out. I was relieved, honestly. I'd rather he just stopped coming in. The next day, while at my other job, I got a text from one of the other waitresses asking if I knew who the fat bald guy was. I said, "Yeah, he's so creepy. Why?" She told me that he asked for my full name. I asked her if she gave it to him, and she said yes. I was honestly really upset, and this made me uncomfortable. She said that he claimed he just wanted the name of the really amazing waitress from last night. Later that day, I got a text. It was from Trevor. He said, "Hey, it's Trevor, your favorite customer. I know you said you can't give your number out, so I took it upon myself to get it myself. Now you didn't break any rules, haha." I was at a loss for words. I blocked the number and hoped that would be the end of it. But later that week, after I got off from work, I found an envelope tucked under my windshield wiper. I grabbed it and got in my car. Its contents were disturbing. It was a bunch of pictures of me in the diner, taken from the parking lot. The pictures got more disturbing though, when they started being of my apartment and of me standing on my front deck or unlocking the front door. Most disturbing of all was a picture taken through the front window at night. I drove straight to the police precinct with the photos to report this. These pictures, accompanied with the text I received from him, was damning enough. I stayed at my parents' house that night, and the next day, a detective called that Trevor guy and told him if he continued to contact me, it would be considered harassment and he would be arrested. I still quit the job at the restaurant just to be safe. My lease was up the next month, and so I moved to a new apartment. I didn't want to have any chance of that man finding me again. He was the first and only true stalker I've ever dealt with in my life. I work at a game development company in Orlando, Florida. It was a stressful couple of weeks for me, and I was really pressed for time before a game's deadline, so I had to stay at the office late almost every night that week. It was a rainy Wednesday night of that week. It was completely pitch black outside, with the occasional strike of lightning lighting up the place, and the sound of the rain pouring on my office window was helping me concentrate on my coding. There was one other person in the office at this point, my coworker Chaz. He was finishing up on his work as well. He was also pressed for time on a strict deadline. By now it was easily between 8 and 9 o'clock, and Chaz knocked on my office door before telling me he was heading out. He asked if I was okay locking up the place, and I told him of course. Then he was off on his merry way. I heard the front door of our company's office slam shut behind him, and with that I was alone. Our entire office is in the shape of an L. The entrance is at one end, and my office is down the short line of the L, basically the corner office. I had to keep myself awake as I was starting to doze off, so I went down the hall to the kitchen to heat up some coffee. Just a little bit, enough to keep me going for another hour. I leaned on the counter by the coffee maker waiting for it to heat up, when I heard this. The sound of a door closing. I peeked my head out into the hall to look and see if anyone was there. I called out, yielding no replies. The door sounded like one of the smaller private office doors, not the heavier front door to the entire office. I left the kitchen to walk down the 2 halls, trying all the doors, which were locked. Then I got to my little hall, and all 3 doors in this hall were shut, including mine. I left that door open 1000%, and there was no draft in here as all the windows were closed. I felt like someone had to still be in the office pranking me. I opened my office door with force, expecting someone to be in there jumping out at me, but no. My office was how I left it. The chair, my computer, everything. It was just a little odd to me that the door closed on its own because it had never done that, but I moved past it and continued my work. The rain continued to hit the window, and the lightning continued to strike about once every minute, startling me a few times actually. Some more time passed, and it was now getting very late to still be in the office. I was content with the progress I made, so I saved all of my work and began closing down my computer. I clicked the shutdown button, then turned off the screen. The screen went black, and then I saw it. In the reflection of the computer screen, I saw behind myself a woman standing there. I don't know how I didn't jump or scream, but I felt my heart drop into my stomach. I didn't turn around. I just got up from my desk, calmly grabbed my bag, pretending not to have noticed, and walked to the door. I didn't look back to shut the door or anything. I walked down the hall until I thought I was far enough away. Then I booked it out the exit of the entire office. I then ran down the flight of stairs to the first floor, then out to my car in the rain. The whole time I was terrified I was being followed, or that she would grab me any second, whoever it was. Once I got in my car, I took a second to breathe. Then I looked up at the window to my office. The light was still on in there, and I'm quite sure I saw a small kink in the blinds, as if someone were on the other side looking down at me. I called one of my bosses, Miranda, at once, and she confirmed no one else should have been there. She said she'd call the night security guy and ask him to check the office. Luckily, I got to go the hell home. Later that night, Miranda called me and said the security guy was in the office but didn't see anyone. I told her what I saw one more time, and it freaked even her out. There's only one camera in our entire office, and it's at the end of the longer hall by the kitchen area. The camera footage never caught any woman walking around the office that night. A long time ago, I did security work in an office building in Midtown Manhattan. It was mid-November, so one of the offices was looking to start decorating their office space with Christmas decorations, which were held in the basement along with other storage. I usually stood in the lobby area of the building just as general security. It was usually an uneventful job for the most part. But on this cold November Monday, my view of this job changed entirely. An employee of this dermatology office on one of the upper levels of the building apparently had gone down to the basement and had reported that all the lights were out and that the elevator wasn't running to the basement floor. This sounded like the electrician's job, until I was also told that there were multiple broken-in doors down there, implying a break-in over the weekend. That's when it became my job to go down there and investigate. Since the elevator wasn't going down to that level, I would have to take the stairs down there. I was going down there alone since I was the only security guard on duty that day. I took a flashlight with me down there since the power was out. I'd be lying if I said this wasn't nerve-wracking going down there alone. On this level was just storage, electrical components, and janitorial equipment. It was a small maze of corridors with different rooms, and navigating this in the dark with nothing but a flashlight was making the hairs on my body stand up. There were different doors in the corridors, which would lead to different storage rooms for many of the different businesses that rented office spaces in the building. And the call turned out to be true. Many of these doors were bashed in. Some of them were so badly damaged that they looked like they were destroyed with an axe. This was more serious than I thought. I was just a security guard. I didn't make enough money to go searching for potentially dangerous people in the basement without a gun. I looked into each room with broken down doors, but each room still seemed to be full with supplies. I couldn't find any trace of theft, but someone clearly came down here with a purpose. I continued looking into the rooms, just peeking in for a second with my flashlight. Then I heard a slam elsewhere in the basement. And suddenly everything went dead silent. The basement noises I was hearing before, from whatever they may have been coming from, a boiler, the pipes, whatever it was, stopped. And I was now in a dead silent basement where I could hear every last sound. Every footstep I took now sounded 10 times louder. Someone was in the basement still, evident by that slam. It may have been another door. It may have been whatever caused the noises to stop. Stupidly, I called out, "Anyone here?" and my voice echoed down the corridor. I continued slowly back the way I came. I wasn't staying down there another moment. This was a job for NYPD at this point. I was almost to the stairs when I heard this heavy breathing coming up from around the final corner. I instantly knew it to be heavy breathing. I was scared shitless. Why was I put in this situation? I turned off my flashlight and tiptoed just a little closer to look around the corner, and weirdly the breathing stopped. I said one hello, then turned the flashlight back on. Even though the light wasn't aimed exactly in that direction, I still easily saw this extremely tall, hunched over figure facing the wall with some kind of long object that could have been a weapon in his hand. I say his because there was no way a person this big and this stature could have been a woman. I also saw their face turn in reaction to the light. It was this pale, abnormally long face. I think they were bald. Another reason I say it was a man, but I didn't look too long. I ran past the figure to the stairs, screaming back at him that the cops are coming, you need to leave now. I ran all the way back up the stairs, through the basement door, then locked it and called 911. A bunch of NYPD cars came, and it was a big thing. At least 4 police officers went down there. I felt pretty useless, I have to say, but removing a dangerous, armed, giant human from the basement with the lights off was not in my job description. I was in the lobby when the officers came back, alone. They didn't have that person I saw with them. They couldn't find him. One of the building's electricians came to fix the electrical issues in the basement. It had something to do with the circuit box in the basement being tampered with. With the lights back on, police still couldn't find anyone down there. There are multiple stairways back upstairs from the basement, which he may have left through. Everyone believed what I saw, though. Those doors didn't smash themselves open. I took sick days the next few days, and every night for a week, I'd lay awake, constantly checking around my room in the dark, scared I'd see some giant figure standing in one of the corners. I held my first job ever in 2002, and I worked at a call center during the graveyard shift. The office was in Makati, and it was a new site. The office layout was kind of in an elongated donut shape, with the donut hole being the elevator lobby / main doors, and the actual office space composed of 2 long hallways and 2 shorter ones. It was also a new site, so only half the office was finished, and the other half was still under renovation. So one long half of the donut was a fully operational production floor with managers' offices and a pantry, while the other long half was reserved for things like conference rooms, the nurse's office, storage, other admin stuff, restrooms, etc. And it was all unfinished. The conference room still had concrete floors, and wires were still sticking out from sockets and all that. While the production half was nice and bright and well lit, as any call center should be, the other half was only partially lit. To make matters worse, the guards would turn off the lights completely on that side, since they figured nobody was using it anyway. As a result, people didn't really hang out on that side of the office, and if you needed to use the restroom, you just kinda had to make a mad dash to and from it. 2 weeks into production, and my teammate, who was obviously very sickly to begin with, had a terrible migraine, and I suggested that she tell our team leader about it so that she could take a break. TL then told her to go visit the nurse's office, located in the unfinished half of the office, something we figured out only because of the sign above the door that we see whenever we go to the restroom. I was to accompany her, so that's what we did. We walked to the nurse's office, but found that the door was locked and nobody was inside, even though the lights were on. The door was the type with one of those vertical window panels on it, so we peeked in to make sure nobody was in there. We saw all the medical equipment and a sick bed, a desk, basically everything you'd expect to find in there, except the nurse. Thinking maybe he or she just went on break, we decided we'll just come back later. After half an hour or so, we did go back, only to find that the light at the nurse's office was off. I remember us being pretty pissed off at the thought that maybe the shift nurse had gone home, but we checked the door anyway to see if maybe there would be a sign or note with the nurse's schedule or whatever. I don't know why I did it, but I tried the door handle despite being aware there was no light on, and I was able to open the door to find that there was no nurse's office, despite the sign above the door saying that that's where it was supposed to be. And yes, that was the only sign. We checked over and over to make sure it was the right room. We were sure it was the same room we visited earlier. But instead of a decked out clinic, we found a room with a small nightlight in an exposed socket that cast only enough light for us to see the walls and floors were concrete. There were no finishes, no beds, no cabinets, nothing. It's like we dreamed up the clinic we saw earlier. A guard approached us at that point, asking what we were doing poking around in an unfinished clinic. So we told him what happened, and he of course thought we were making it up. While we were kind of trying to convince him that we weren't lying, we all suddenly stopped talking when we felt the temperature just drop. We shivered, our hair stood on end. My heart started racing, and nobody could speak for a minute. Finally, my teammate burst into hysterical tears, and the guard then nervously shooed us away and locked the door to the supposed nurse's office. We were escorted back to our team's bay, and we explained what happened to our team leader. He pretty much just sat there stunned as he listened to us. Since my teammate wouldn't stop crying and was starting to hyperventilate very badly, they had to send her to Makati Med. The incident was never brought up again. If you're a fan of horror, which I know you are, then you'll love Shudder, which is a video streaming service catered specifically to horror fans. And what better time of year than right now to curl up on a chilly fall night and watch a good scary movie? Shudder has the biggest collection of any horror, thriller, or supernatural films that you could think of, and you can stream on all of your favorite devices. Shudder is also home to many exclusive original movies such as Prisoners of Ghostland featuring Nicolas Cage and Great White, a killer shark movie perfect for any Jaws fans. And you'll never find yourself running out of things to watch, as new films that'll keep you on the edge of your seat are added weekly. I personally have always been a big fan of found footage films like the Blair Witch Project, so it was great for me to see VHS 94 added recently, which is yet another exclusive to Shudder. So get started streaming the best horror, thriller, and supernatural content. Shudder's expertly curated collection includes must-see titles like Vicious Fun, The Mortuary Collection, and PG Psycho Gorman. Plus all the best horror documentaries and the hit Creepshow TV series from executive producer Greg Nicotero of The Walking Dead. To try Shudder free for 30 days, go to shudder.com and use promo code NIGHTMARE. Links in the description.
When somebody goes hunting, they're normally right smack in the middle of a forest or the woods, completely devoid of other people. Seems like the perfect setting for a horror story, right? These 3 supposedly true stories will show you just what can go wrong while hunting. This first story was submitted to me in June by somebody named Robert Scherneman. His story takes place upstate New York, a place I'm familiar with. Here's his story. I've been a passionate hunter ever since my dad before me started taking me out on trips every Saturday, and I thought I would pass down the same tradition to my son. During the setting of this story, my son Peter was 10 years old. I figured that was a good age to introduce him to the world of hunting. I armed Peter and myself with Remington Model 798 sniper rifles, however I carried it until I found the spot where I usually find game. We could have used the deer hunting tower hidden deeper in the woods, but I figured that wouldn't be the best first time experience. I handed him the gun when we were set up. I had already taught him the basics of firearms, so it wasn't like I was taking him out there with no experience. I chose to stay put the first time as it would be easier for him, and I figured I would move up to the more advanced methods of hunting in the future sessions. There was a lot of waiting, more waiting than usual in this certain spot. I could see Peter was getting bored, constantly yawning and sighing, and that disappointed me. I didn't want him to think this sport was that boring, so I packed up our stuff and told him we're moving. He seemed to perk up a bit with excitement, and that made me happy. As soon as we began walking, I heard footsteps. I put my arm in front of Peter silently and motioned for him to raise his gun. He did with excitement, until I spotted someone's head peer out from around a tree in the distance. I pushed the gun down immediately, a bit disappointed, but also relieved that Peter didn't shoot. I gave him a quick little apologetic wave, and with that, he disappeared back behind the tree out of sight. Was he another hunter? I couldn't tell, but from what I saw of him, even in the distance, there was something off-putting about his face. I couldn't put my finger on what it was at that moment. Seeing somebody this deep into the woods was rare and also strange, and this guy didn't exactly look like a hunter. So, as a safety precaution, I suppose, I steered Peter in the other direction. Still no sign of any deer. Peter asked me about the man, like who I thought he was, for example, as expected, and I just told him I didn't know, and I didn't think we should get closer. I didn't want to lie to him. A few minutes later, Peter started complaining that he was hungry. I was getting pretty hungry myself, so we stopped and unpacked our snacks. I was extremely disappointed that nothing had happened by now. While eating my sandwich, I heard footsteps again in the distance. Peter did too, as he immediately picked up his rifle and pointed it in that direction. I felt my heart drop when I could see the same man from before peering out from another tree at us. I lowered Peter's gun again, and I noticed he seemed a bit uncomfortable now, as was I. I told him to wait there while I began to walk over to the man, trying to emotionally prepare myself to confront him. About halfway over, I stopped and thought to myself, what the hell am I doing? My son is right over there. I turned around and hurried back to Peter, telling him it's time to go. If you had your son in the middle of the woods and you thought you were being stalked, odds are you would just want to get out of there too. We were not running, we were merely walking back to the road. I was mentally waiting for a twig snap or a leaf crunch from behind us, and when it happened, I nudged Peter to go along ahead. I angrily turned around and stormed towards the man, who was once again peering from behind a tree. I'd say when I got within 30 feet from the tree, he moved back behind the tree out of sight, and then I heard a thud, as if something were just dropped onto the ground. I had my gun loaded in my hand as I cautiously walked up to the tree. I didn't even say a word. I don't know why. All I did was slowly creep up to the tree, and when I got there, I felt as if everything around me had completely collapsed, or rather ceased to exist, and all that I could focus on was the head laying face first on the ground in front of me. No body, just head. I didn't even look up or around the tree to see who had dropped it there. I just full on sprinted back to Peter and told him to run. We made it back home safely within 5 minutes, and I made 100% sure we weren't followed. However, I stayed up the whole night keeping watch for the sake of my family's safety. I found out the next day through my wife that there had been 2 disappearances of local hunters, and that's when I called the police and reported what I had experienced. I had to, of course, play it safe for a long time, at least a few months, before taking my son out again. What baffles me, though, is how this person managed to kill 2 hunters who obviously had to be armed with some kind of weapon. I have since resumed hunting with my son. The next story was submitted to me just a month ago by Nathan Zielinski, and it's more of a mix between a camping and a hunting story. Here it is. It was my first time hunting. I was 21, going with my friends Anthony, Christian, Tom, and his girlfriend Diana to some park in Colorado to go elk hunting. We brought 2 separate tents that were relatively large, sleeping bags, 2 days worth of food and drinks, and of course, guns. I couldn't even tell you the name of the gun Anthony handed me. It was just a basic looking hunting rifle. Honestly, I didn't know how I felt about the whole thing. Killing a living, breathing animal that has just as much of a will to live as me, merely for so-called fun, didn't seem cool to me. But it was like the 5th time Anthony offered, and I felt like I had to say yes. I decided I wouldn't shoot any animals about halfway through the car ride. Anthony pulled into a lot, we unpacked the car, and proceeded to hike about a mile into the woods before setting up camp. First thing after setting up camp, we all followed Anthony's lead as he proudly babbled on about hunting techniques. I wished I had someone to laugh about it with, but everyone else seemed serious about it as well. I tried busting Anthony's chops by asking him, wouldn't it be better to stop talking if you don't want to scare away any potential prey? He got pissed. I could tell he took this really seriously, and from there on, I shut up. And by there on, I mean however long things were going normal, and that wasn't long. During our hunt, we ran into a rather strange group of people, 3 rather large, dirty men with long, sticky hair, They looked like they belonged to some kind of inbreeding house deep in the woods. They looked at us and sort of nodded their heads as if to say hello as we passed by them, one by one. We were officially freaked out. It might sound like something that would be laughable, but under the circumstances, it was horrifying. We were deep in the woods, far from the lot, which was, for the record, completely empty, and it may sound exaggerated, but these three looked like creepy lowlives who could be dangerous. Thankfully, though, they didn't follow us, which allowed for us to peacefully go on with our hunt. Anthony ended up killing a deer. We didn't find any elks. We dragged the deer all the way back to our campsite, and that was actually our dinner for the night. Anthony and Tom went through a disgusting, bloody process of skinning, and I'm pretty sure gutting the deer, but I didn't watch for more than a few seconds. Anthony made us venison burgers. He came prepared with the buns and everything. While I didn't particularly agree with the sport, I was impressed with Anthony. We went to sleep first thing at dark with the fire still going outside. I was having a really bad time trying to get comfortable in that sleeping bag. Anthony and Christian seemed to fall asleep quickly, while I, on the other hand, had to be rolling around for at least 2 hours. I've always had a hard time falling asleep in sleeping bags. I was actually about to get up and go outside to pee when I heard footsteps coming from outside the tent. I opened my mouth to call out Tom or Diana's name, but I realized, what if it wasn't them? I laid silently and listened. In an unexpected instant, the zipper to our tent got pulled down, and I threw my head down to the side and acted as if I were asleep. There was a short pause before the zipper got pulled back up. I waited until the pairs of footsteps moved away. They seemed to be moving to Tom and Diana's tent. Then I realized it must have been them, and they must have been checking if we were asleep so they could, mess around, I guess. So I decided to play a little joke on them. I gave it about 5 minutes before I unzipped the tent and began creeping over to their tent. Then I realized their zipper was still undone. That's strange, I thought to myself. I crept over expecting to scare the two lovebirds, but instead, when I got close enough, I saw 2 men inside of the tent doing something to Diana. At that moment, I screamed as loud as I could, mostly out of fear, but also to wake everyone up. Anthony and Christian stormed out from the tent with their rifles. When the 2 men fled from the tent, I realized something. They were the same 2 men we had seen earlier. Tom and Anthony fired rounds in their direction to scare them off. However, something even more horrifying happened after that. After they shot their rounds, we all looked around us completely horrified as men in almost all directions who were previously hiding in bushes and behind trees were taking off in different directions. We tried waking up Tom and Diana, but they seemed to have been injected with some kind of tranquilizers by the men. We had no choice but to wait until they woke up, which took about maybe half an hour. Running back to the car in that pitch-black forest was one of the most horrifying moments of my life. We don't know who all those people were. They could have been part of some secluded inbreeding house for all we knew, or even some kind of cannibalistic family. We have no idea what they were planning on doing with Tom and Diana, but we're just happy we all got out of there safely. This last story was written by Jared the Sprinter, and he shares his night hunting experience. I was doing some night hog hunting in the woods near my backyard. I was hiding in the tower I had built about a decade ago. In case anyone's wondering, I of course had a night vision scope attachment. I guess I'm what you would consider a hardcore hunter. I don't want to bore you with the unnecessary story prolonging details, so I'll make this short. And I want everyone to know that though I agree this story sounds far-fetched and crazy, it is nothing but the truth. And I in a way actually consider myself lucky that I'll always have such a horrifying story to share. So, while I was sitting in the tower waiting for movement, it finally came. I took aim and found the source. But it wasn't at all a hog, or any kind of animal I was expecting. It was a person, a man wearing all black. Black sweatpants, black shoes, and a black hoodie with the hood over his head. But that wasn't the freakiest part. He was dragging a sack behind him. My heart started racing. I was pretty sure I was witnessing this guy trying to bury a body. I continued to watch him, but then he slowed down, and I swear to God, it looked as if he turned his head up to me. I ducked down under the wooden walls of the tower, shaking in my boots. Yes, I had a gun, but just the idea of using it against a person is horrifying. I lay low, praying to God that he hadn't seen me. It would make sense if he could, though. It's practically pitch black out here, or at least that was my logic. Seconds felt like an eternity as I waited for the footsteps in the leaves to move elsewhere, but I didn't hear any footsteps. All I heard was the sound of a foot hitting one of the wooden planks on the ladder of the tower. I felt the entire tower vibrate and shake as there were 2 more steps moving up the ladder. At this point, I was asking myself deep down, am I going to be able to shoot someone? But for some reason, whoever was down there decided not to climb all the way up, as I heard them jump back down to the forest ground and began dragging the sack away. I think I stayed frozen like a statue for at least 10 minutes before even peeking over the ledge again. The coast seemed clear. I had to get home and warn the police immediately. I hopped over the ledge and descended down the ladder. I turned on my pocket flashlight, which in hindsight was a stupid move considering the situation, and ran back in the direction of my house. I was only able to run for about 10 seconds or so when I heard the rapid, manic footsteps crunching the leaves from behind me. I took a look over my shoulder, and there he was, inches away from my face. I spun around and shot him in the shoulder. He stopped and screamed in agony, and I took that moment to finish my dash to my house. Again, in hindsight, I should have held him hostage somehow, but that doesn't even matter now. I called the police, who showed up within 15 minutes with a whole search squad, and I led them all into the woods to the exact location where I shot him. There was a faint yet noticeable blood trail spilled onto the leaves which led past the body bag, which the cops seized, and eventually right to the maniac, who was hiding under a log next to a tree. He was arrested and tried for the murder of Jin-Quen Sakanaki, a Japanese corner store owner. I don't know the full story behind it, but I do know I won't forget this one for the rest of my life, and I'll also be telling it for the rest of my life.
Our houses are usually the one place we can call home and feel isolated from the outside world. At least until someone or something from the outside world enters without consent. I've taken 3 very long, supposedly true horror stories that I've either found on the internet or were shared to me and condensed the stories to fit a nicer length video. Number 1. 19-year-old single child Damian Andrews would drive directly from campus after his last class on Friday to his job at a gas station for 6 hours, and after his shift was done, he'd go back to his parents' house. Usually his parents weren't home on weekend nights, as they were the ones who were more often out drinking. Damian pulled into the empty driveway, and as expected, everything was dark in the house. He needed to put his bike that was still in his trunk back into the shed in the backyard, so he removed the bike from the trunk of his truck and rode it down the pavement past the fence and to the shed. When he shut the shed door, he noticed the bathroom light upstairs in the house was on now. He didn't remember noticing the bathroom light being on when he passed the side of the house, so he assumed that maybe one of his parents stayed home for the night. Damian entered the house through the back door, and as he opened his mouth ready to call for one of his parents, something deep down told him not to. Damian went up the half flight of stairs from his den to the midsection of the house. He looked up the short stairway to the upstairs and saw a light creeping into the hallway through the closed bathroom door. So somebody was in there. He went upstairs calling out Mom and Dad. There were no responses, but he was in very close range of the bathroom now, which made it odd. He approached the bathroom door, again calling out Mom and Dad. No response.
Damien figured maybe his mom was in the bathtub with earbuds in or something. The door was locked, so one of them had to be in there. When the phone rang, he went downstairs to answer it, to find out it was his dad calling, checking in to make sure Damien made it home okay. His dad sounded drunk as usual per Friday nights, so Damien questioned him as to why he left mom at home as he walked back upstairs to the bathroom door. His dad seemed confused. Then he noticed at the bottom of the door, through the opening, 2 shadow outlines of feet standing by the door, literally facing the door right on top of it. Then Damien's dad dropped a bomb and told him that his mother was right beside him at the table. He did the only logical thing he could do. He ran outside, hung up on his dad, and called the police. When Damien looked up to the bathroom window, he saw the light turn off. 10 minutes of hiding in the bushes later, he heard the police out front, who in the end found nobody in the house. Number 2. The protagonist's name was not given in this story, so I'll refer to him as Ted. Ted was 16 years old and he lived with his dad and brother at their isolated farmhouse. The house was relatively small, with a first floor and a basement. However, it was a huge amount of property with a barn and trees in all directions, providing optimal privacy. There was a long driveway that extended from the side road to the property, which was what Ted was riding down at the moment, returning from his friend's house on his bike. Ted rode into the barn where the family keeps all of the bikes, and then headed for the front door of the house. However, on his way, he noticed the basement doors were wide open. Not seeing any cars in the driveway, Ted assumed it was his little brother who, for whatever reason, left them open. Shutting the doors and stepping down into the basement, Ted quickly realized none of the lights in the basement were on. He called for his little brother Andrew, who answered from upstairs. Andrew came rushing downstairs, turning on the light on the way. The first thing Andrew pointed out was the foul stench in the basement, but Ted said he couldn't notice anything. Ted questioned Andrew as to why he opened the basement doors and then left them that way. His response was, "I didn't." Ted continually accused him of either lying or forgetting, but Andrew swore he hadn't even been in the basement all night. The disturbing thought that it was left unlocked and somebody entered the house came up, and the two subsequently turned the basement practically upside down looking for anyone, turning up nothing. Andrew said he had been in the living room all night and hadn't heard anything, plus he would have noticed if somebody had come upstairs, so Ted felt at ease knowing nobody was in the house. He sat down on the basement couch and started watching TV. That's when he noticed the couch felt kind of weird, less soft than usual. He got up and lifted one of the cushions and screamed. Ted ran upstairs, running into Andrew halfway up, shoving him the rest of the way and locking the basement door behind him. When Ted could finally get some words out, he told Andrew he found a dead body stuffed below the cushions of the basement couch. The body was later determined to be that of their closest neighbor George, whose wife had also gone missing a few days prior. As far as Ted and his family knew at the time of the posting of this story, the culprit was never found. Number 3. Edward Gallo was 24 years old and was living alone in his newly bought home in a rural Virginia area where he would frequently have his girlfriend Sarah stay over on the weekends. One Friday night, after going a whole day without speaking to her, he decided to call her and invite her over. She didn't answer, so he left a voicemail. It was odd for her to not respond to his calls or texts, so he was starting to get worried that maybe she was losing interest. After calling repeatedly with no response, Ed heard one of the doors closing from downstairs. He breathed a sigh of relief, knowing that she had come over after all. Ed texted her saying come upstairs. After a few seconds of tinks and thud sounds coming from downstairs, she finally started walking up the stairs. She was walking up really slowly though, as if she were taking 2 steps per stair. Finally, Ed just called out her name in confusion, and the steps stopped. Then Ed's phone began to vibrate, and when he took it out of his pocket, the name on the caller ID was Sarah. He picked up, and immediately Sarah apologized for not being able to get back to him. But he interrupted her and asked her what she's doing on the stairs. There was a long silence, and then she finally said, "What?" Ed asked again. This time, Sarah informed him that she was still in her car on her way home from work. Ed locked the door, and immediately after, the doorknob started turning. All Ed could think to do was to yell, "Get out of here before I call the police." Whoever was on the stairs ran all the way back down and out the front door of the house. Ed looked out the window searching for whoever it was and saw the most disturbing thing he had ever seen. Across the road was a tall man wearing a dress shirt and ripped jean shorts, looking directly at him. And despite how far away he was, Ed could see a smile on the man's face before he turned and ran into the woods to never be seen again. Dogs are called man's best friend for a reason. They will sacrifice themselves if it means saving the ones they love. Here are 3 horrifying stories that would have turned out tragic had a dog not been around. Number 3. I had to watch after my sister when my parents were out one night. I wouldn't be out anyway though. I was busy playing the current hit game that had just come out at the time. My dog Sheriff was laying next to me when he lifted his head up and his ears twitched. You know, that thing that dogs do when they hear something. I paused the game to see if I could hear what he was listening for. I didn't hear anything and lost interest, assuming it was someone walking their dog outside or something. Sheriff jumped off the bed and ran out the half-open door to the bedroom. He was barking, going crazy at something. I didn't care to follow him. I simply yelled at him to shut up. But eventually, his normal annoying barking suddenly turned crazed and defensive, as if he were confronting something or someone. That's when I got suspicious and ran to go see what it was. I heard a Sheriff's nails scrape the basement steps as he flew down the stairs. My heart sank as I realized he must have been chasing something. I found myself standing at the top of the basement steps for a whole minute, staring into the darkness below, gathering up the courage to go down there. I finally did, turning the light on the way down. Sheriff was standing by the door to the laundry room. I didn't even dream of opening that door. I trusted in him enough to believe that someone was in there. I struggled, but eventually picked him up and ran with him all the way back upstairs. As I was about to shut the light, I heard the sound of the laundry room door creaking open. At that instant, I slammed the basement door shut and locked it. I listened for a few moments with my ear against the door, and I could hear, barely over the sound of Sheriff barking, the sound of the steps squeaking. I dove for the phone and called the police. When they arrived, they caught him trying to bust out through the basement window. Me and my sister watched as the officers walked him out to the car, and I'll never forget the dreadful stare the man gave me as he was forced into the back seat of the police car. But I'll also never forget how grateful I was to have Sheriff with me that night. Number 2. I used to have a Beagle Pointer mix before she passed away at the age of 11. Her name was Mandy, and she was the sweetest and most loyal dog a person could ask for. She would never harm a fly, but she did have a big troublemaking mouth. So the story goes, I was 15 years old, getting ready for sleep one night like any other night. Mandy slept in my room, and when I walked into my room, finally ready to crash in bed, I was greeted to Mandy growling. She wasn't looking at anything in particular. I playfully asked her what was wrong, and she just made an annoyed doggy sound before putting her head down. I found it funny. For the good hour of me rolling around trying to fall asleep, Mandy would constantly break the silence with growling. I would peek at her, but she would still have her head down. She showed no reaction to me offering to take her out, so I could check that off the list. It quickly went from cute and funny to just annoying, but I eventually fell asleep. I woke up to see that it was 2 a.m. and Mandy was growling. I tried to adjust my eyes in the dark, and I could eventually see Mandy standing in the middle of the room. She was looking up at my closet door. I felt my heart begin to race. What I was witnessing was flat out disturbing. I turned on the lamp and watched as Mandy continued to stare up at the elevated closet. I don't know what I was thinking, but I decided to open up the closet and check what she was barking at. I want to note right now I have one of those closets that lead to an attic. When I checked, there was nothing in the closet, but I noticed the attic door was cracked open. You can imagine the fear in my body as I ran to my parents' room to get my dad. He didn't seem to take me too seriously until he got to my room and saw Mandy growling and looking up in my closet. My dad is a big guy, so he went in there without a weapon. I sat there, worried for what was to come next. What came next was my dad screaming at the top of his lungs at somebody. I heard boxes fall over and glass shatter as my dad moaned in apparent pain. Somebody was rushing out of the closet. I hoped it was my dad, but instead, some 6'5" man with a hammer in his hand jumped out from the closet and passed me. What happened next still surprises everyone. Mandy jumped up and grabbed a hold of the man's arm with her teeth. The scream of the unfamiliar voice filled the room. My dad came rushing out of the closet just in time to jump onto the intruder, taking him down. He sent my mom to fetch my little brother's prop handcuffs. My dad held him down while I handcuffed him. Thankfully, he was sent to jail. I don't know what his intentions were, but obviously if he had a hammer with him, he probably wasn't just planning on robbing us. If we didn't have Mandy at that time, I could only imagine what would have happened to our family. Number 1. I was only 11 years old, and my brother was only 8. We were walking our dog Buster around the block in the dark. Buster was a husky German Shepherd mix. Upon turning the corner to the other side of the block, we ran into a tall man who greeted us with a smile. He stopped in his tracks and seemed to expect us to as well. It seemed he was trying to start a conversation, but we just kept walking past. My brother kept looking back, telling me that the man was following us. He was right. Each time I turned around, the man was the same distance from us, but he would stop looking whenever we looked. I motioned to my brother to walk faster. The faster we started to walk, it seemed the closer he got to us. We were approaching our house, but my heart stopped when I heard the muffled scream of my brother as he was grabbed and pulled away. Buster started barking like a rabid dog, and I shit you not, pulled the leash out of my hands and sunk his teeth into the man's leg. I could see the blood dripping down his leg as his screams caught the attention of the people inside their houses. Our neighbor came outside, and we explained everything while pointing at the man. The man began hopping away. I had to put the leash back on Buster to keep him from chasing him. My neighbor called the cops. She was a tiny little woman. She couldn't do anything to that guy even if she tried. She then walked to our door and told our parents what happened. Police came to question us and the neighbor. They caught the man limping down a sidewalk a few blocks over shortly after. One of the cops told us our dog was a hero, but we already knew that.
This video topic is gaming horror stories, and this video is appropriately sponsored by Opera GX. I spent a lot of time finding stories trying to scare you guys, but did you know default browsers are scaring your computer resources? Opera GX is on a mission to get people to break up with boring browsers like Chrome, Edge, and Safari. With the GX control feature, you can enhance performance on your PC when gaming with your browser open, and get rid of lag while playing games and listening to music. Perfect for when you want to keep a bunch of tabs open to not lose them, but you don't want your browser to hurt your gaming performance. The panel lets users limit the amount of CPU or RAM they're willing to let their browser use. My personal favorite feature is GX Mods. Opera GX offers you a lot of customization. It can actually be overwhelming. However, with GX Mods, you can now find ways to flip your entire browser 180 with one click and change pretty much anything you want. If you want to hear a ghost wailing anytime you click the search button, or you want to turn your entire browser into an arcade, it's easy. Choose one of the many mods already added to the browser, or create a completely new one that suits you best. Opera GX is also equipped with an import tool that allows you to quickly import all your settings from your previous browser to Opera GX, like browsing history, bookmarks, and cookies. It's also compatible with every Google Chrome extension. So while classic horror movie tropes like running upstairs when chased are pretty boring, cliche, and worn out, that doesn't mean your browser has to be too. So if you're interested, use my link below to download Opera GX today. I live in Chandler, Arizona. This happened when I was like 17 and in my heavy gaming phase, still living with my parents. I played a lot of Call of Duty in my room on my computer in those days, especially in the summertime when it's so unbearably hot outside and I prefer to stay inside in the air conditioning anyway. Back when I lived at home, I'd have the place to myself a lot because my parents travel a lot and I was the last one to move out. If I recall correctly, this was on a Friday night, or a night that school was out the next day because I was staying up late. After I got home from school, I submitted a paper that was due that night to get it over with. Then I had to do some shopping afterwards on my mom's orders since they'd be gone for a while. It was how I earned my keep in the house, according to my dad. They left cash for me to use. I always had to show them the receipt though, so that I wouldn't just pocket any of the money. My mom gave me a shopping list, so I went to Whole Foods in my old Camry, my first car. Shopping took about an hour door to door. While in the grocery store, this guy online behind me started talking to me, and I don't know why. He made a comment about one of the things I was buying and just wouldn't stop. Even as I was bagging my groceries, he kept talking to me, which I found weird. He wasn't paying attention to anyone else. I was still nice though. When it was time to leave, I said have a good one and left. I went out to my car in the parking lot and packed the trunk, then headed home. It was a scorching hot day, as we were in early June. I wasn't looking to go out and do anything outside once I was done with everything I needed to do. It was dark out by now, so I got right on Call of Duty Black Ops on my computer and texted my friend Johnny to get on as well. He joined my party, and we played some team deathmatch as we always did. I was using my noise-canceling Logitech headset. We were committed already to playing Call of Duty all night and ranking up, so of course I needed to take a break to make dinner at some point. Probably 2 hours into playing, I told Johnny I was going to eat dinner and I'd probably be back on in an hour. He said he'd be back on later too. So with that, I took a break and made some pasta for dinner. The kitchen is downstairs and my room is upstairs. While I was sitting in the kitchen eating, I knew for sure I heard a thump from upstairs. Did it sound like a footstep? I wasn't sure. It could have been any number of things, but the last thing I'd imagine it would be a footstep. I did, however, go and lock the front door now. Oftentimes for a while I would leave the door unlocked just because my parents' house is in a good side of town, and I just never took the idea of a break-in seriously. It's something you hear about on the news, but don't think it'll ever happen to you. I went upstairs, and I don't know what I was expecting, but I said my brother Tristan's name into the hallway. I knew he wasn't supposed to be here, but I don't know. I heard a sound, and I felt the urge to see if anyone was here. When no one answered back, I went back to my room and got back on Call of Duty. I put my headset back on and texted Johnny that I'm going back on. Shortly after he came back on, we started playing team deathmatch again. A couple games in, I looked to my left at the doorway of my room into the hallway. I don't know if something in my peripheral vision or some other sense felt something there, but I would leave the door open when I was home alone, as my mom would tell me to. The hallway was dark except for the one little nightlight plugged into an outlet. My room shone blue from my wall lights. Some of the blue poured into the part of the hallway closest to my room. In between the crack of the door was total blackness. I couldn't see through it. I didn't think anything of it. After our next game, Johnny said he was taking a leak and walked away while we were in the lobby. I looked at my phone, then looked back out to the hallway, and I noticed something was different. Now I could see through the crack of the door into the hallway. My first thought was someone blocking it just minutes ago? By instinct, I spun my chair around to face the bed behind me, and there was a man sitting on my bed, with his freakishly upright posture, and his hands resting on his thighs. He almost looked to be smiling. I was so alarmed I jumped out of my seat onto the desk and crawled onto the desk, causing my monitor and basically everything else to fall off of it. I screamed, "What do you want?" And he started to actually smile now, showing his teeth, like he was laughing. I ran out of the room into the hallway. I stopped halfway down the hallway and looked back at my bedroom door. I heard the springs of my bed lifting, and then the guy slowly walked into the doorway and stopped. He stood there. I once again yelled, "What do you want?" He then spoke in a stuttered, slow voice, asking if he could play too. I asked, "How did you get in here?" He stepped a few steps forward and pointed down the stairs. I assume he was implying he entered through the front door. I was at a loss for what to do, so I ran down the stairs to the landline phone, as my cell phone was still in my room. I grabbed the phone and a kitchen knife and screamed, "You need to leave, I'm calling 911. I heard footsteps walking down the steps, and the last time I saw the guy was when he walked past the kitchen, looked at me, and then I heard him walking out the front door. I ran to slam it shut and lock it. For the first time ever, I was ashamed at myself for leaving the door completely unlocked. I held the phone for a few minutes, deciding whether to tell my parents. Ultimately, I did. My mom was concerned at first, then grew livid, so much so to the point that she put my dad on the phone. He told me to go through the house and make sure nothing was taken. I went through every room, and honestly, everything seemed in place. I said the man seemed like something was off about him, and my dad said, "Yeah, no shit." The man didn't seem overtly hostile, but something was wrong with him, and I don't know what his intention was. The image of him sitting on my bed, and the realization that he was watching me through the crack in the door, was haunting enough. This is a story I'm not proud of, mostly for my naivety. When I was in middle school and early high school, I didn't know how to talk to girls at all at school, but that's a lot of boys in middle school. I wasn't shy in general. I had friends and did normal things an 8th grader would do. I just had never kissed a girl or anything. Some of my friends at the time claimed they've already gone further than that with girls, and I was starting to feel pressure. But I was still having trouble approaching girls in that way. The mentality went from boys making fun of girls to suddenly liking them in a matter of like a year. I was a pretty big gamer in middle school and early high school. This was when I was in 8th grade. I was like 13. My voice was still probably a bit prepubescent sounding. It was 2010. I played a lot of console games and computer MMORPG games. My favorite console games at the time were GTA 4 and Call of Duty, and my favorite computer game was this MMORPG called Gunzu. It was this online game where you would level up by killing monsters, and the more you leveled up, the higher level monsters and hunting grounds you'd be able to tackle. The online community in this game was very active, and there were tons of players. My older brother used to play it a little bit too. I played it more for sure though. I was in a guild and town and everything. I don't remember how it happened, but I befriended this female player who was a higher level than me. Her username was Medusa. Anytime I'd sign in and she was on, she'd message me, and vice versa. We would join parties together, which meant we'd share EXP on whatever monsters we killed, and we'd just chat for hours. She knew a lot about me, including my age, my town, and some personal family details. She would open up to me too. Eventually she told me her name was Teresa. It was weird feeling such a connection with a girl who really you knew nothing about her appearance or her voice. It truly was like having a pen pal but better. It was interesting enough that we both lived in New York State. She lived about an hour from me. After a few weeks or maybe even a month, we started talking about maybe meeting one day. To do this though, we'd have to exchange numbers. At the time I didn't actually have a cell phone yet. I only had an iPod Touch. But I was able to download some texting app that allowed me to send messages to people with cell phones. Through this app, I was able to send her a picture of myself. It was definitely this cringy 8th grade boy selfie of me trying to look good looking. She called me cute, and then she sent back a picture of herself. She looked a couple years older than me, like 15, which was the age she told me she was. Based on the picture, I found her very attractive. This was around the time our messages became more flirtatious and romantic. But we were both minors, and so of course neither of us could just go drive an hour away. However, she apparently had a solution for this. She told me her sister had friends that lived around me anyway, and she could probably get a ride to me. This was exciting news for my little 13-year-old self. I wanted to wait for a day and night that my parents wouldn't be home and I'd have the house to myself, which was about a week later, I believe. My parents were going to the Hamptons for the whole weekend, so it would just be my brother and I home. My brother was 18, so I asked him to please just go out for the night with friends so that I could be alone with Teresa. I gave Teresa my address and told her to come that Saturday whenever she wanted. She said she'd be coming a little later, like at night. She didn't give me an exact time. At that point in time, we still had never spoken on the phone. I still hadn't heard her voice. I was so nervous all day that I couldn't even play video games. I was busy cleaning my room, making things look cool, fixing my appearance, even rehearsing things to say in the initial moments of meeting. Then I got a message from Teresa saying she's here. I sprang up and ran to the front door. I looked through the peephole and didn't see anyone. She then said you can come out to the front door. I opened the door and stepped onto the front porch. I looked around, and the street was dark and quiet. No cars, no people. I went back inside and shut the door. I messaged her back, saying I don't see you. She said back, oh, I must have the wrong house. Give me a minute. That was a bit weird. I locked the door and sat on the living room couch, nervously waiting, playing games on my iPod. I got a message from her again. She said she's here and to come outside. I replied, ring the bell so I know you're at the right house. Then the doorbell rang. My nerves really set in now. I walked to the door, looked through the peephole, and didn't see anyone. I said, Teresa, through the door. Through the peephole, I saw a hand reach towards the door and knock. I said, Teresa again. As I kept looking through the peephole, everything felt like it instantly crumbled down on top of me as this bald, creepy-looking short guy stepped in front of the peephole and then said through the door, hey Joey, it's Medusa from Gunzu. I want to talk. I ran away from the door with my hands over my mouth, truly speechless. The person I'd been talking to all this time was a creepy grown man. I was disgusted and scared. I went to call my brother's cell phone. He didn't pick up. The doorbell kept ringing. I went to my bedroom and locked myself in. I held the house phone in my grasp, considering calling my parents, but too embarrassed to do so. My room was the only other room in the house with the lights on. I have a big window in my room that overlooks the whole side yard of our corner house. I turned off my lamp and slightly kinked the blind just a crack, and I saw that guy on the other side trying to look in. He started to knock on the window and started saying through the closed window how much of a connection we clearly have and that we can at least be friends. I responded nothing. I called my brother again, and he picked up this time. I said, please come home right now. The Teresa person was a grown man the entire time, and he's at my window right now. My brother's always been pretty big, even as a teenager. I'd feel safer with him being here. He said he was coming home with his friends right now. We stayed on the phone so I could tell him if anything happened. I ran to my parents' bedroom upstairs and hid there. The man was blowing up my message app, saying he would like to talk and there's a reason he had to lie about who he was. When my brother got home, he told me he sees the guy outside. My brother and his 3 friends confronted the creepy short man outside, so I went outside now to watch. The 4 of them intimidated the man, calling him a sick fuck and such. And the man's defense was that he was concerned for my well-being, inviting strangers from online over, and that this was supposed to be a learning lesson. I refuted this claim by asking him why he would say that we could be good friends at my window. When my brother and his friends started pushing the man, he started quickly walking to his car. My brother kicked the guy's taillight, while one of his friends threw a rock at his window. He sped off down the road to never be seen again. This was humiliating and disturbing, but at the same time, I was really grateful of my brother and his friends to come to my aid. They potentially saved me from a seriously sick creep breaking into the house. It's still painful and uncomfortable, realizing all that time I spent opening up to who I thought was a girl my own age on a game was some creepy grown man with a different agenda. This happened last week. Just a bit of background information. I had just officially quit playing Fortnite. Not that it's important, but this was May 2021, so Fortnite had already had a lot of people quitting the game. My friend Brandon suggested that I download Apex Legends and play with him. I had already had the game downloaded, so I just updated it to the current version. So I logged on, and I remembered how bad I was at this game. I hadn't played since the game came out, so my stats were awful, and I had only the starting Legends. I mained Pathfinder and Bloodhound because I just thought that they were the 2 best starters. Something else to note, I have a very loud gaming headset, so I could barely hear any background noise. But to get to the actual story, it happened when I was home alone. My parents had gone out for their week-late anniversary dinner, and my brother was at his friend's house. I was playing Apex with Brandon, when he suddenly got a text from a random number. He said, "Dude, what the fuck, I just got a random message." "What does it say?" I asked. I remember exactly how it went. He said, "Look out the window." "Don't look out the window, dude, there's nothing there," I replied. "No," he says, "look out your window." "What? Why?" I said, as I turned my head slightly to the right, then to the left. I didn't know which window to look out of, since this room has 5 windows. I looked at each of them in a panic. Then I found it. The one that was least visible from my couch. There was this man just standing there. I was clueless. I didn't think much of it because the dude was facing away from the window. Little did I know just yet. I put my headphones back on. Brandon just got another text. He told me, "Luke, I'm not messing with you. Dude, there's someone outside your window." "I know," I told him. "I just saw him. He's just looking the other way." "What?" he asked. "He just took a picture of you at the window looking clueless." "What the fuck?" I said. "I suggest you call the cops and get him out of there," he tells me. Then, strangely, he stopped talking, and there was that sound of an Xbox notification. He left the party. He never does that without saying bye or that he's going to bed, and I saw he was still in Apex playing in a match. What the fuck, I muttered to myself again. Eventually, I got a party invitation from Brandon, and I asked what happened. Next thing I know, there was a deeper voice than Brandon's on the mic. I remember in every little detail what it said. "Come outside right now, or I will come in." I couldn't recognize the voice at all, but I knew the voice was that of a grown man. I looked back at the window, and sure enough, there he was banging on the window. He looked completely demented. His face was a dark red, with his hands gushing blood. As he pounded on the window, it started to crack. I picked up my phone, which was right next to me. I was horrified to see it was at 1%, basically out of battery. I kept saying, "Oh shit," over and over. I put my phone to my ear and mouthed the words, "There's a man trying to break into my house. His face is dark red and his hands are bleeding." Next thing I know, he starts screaming while bashing at my window. Then I thought, wait a second. There's screen sheets in front of all of our windows. So how, if he never cut it, was he already at the glass? It took too much time to think. Finally, a shard of glass falls to the ground. A hole large enough for me to shout through opens up. I screamed, "Go the fuck away before the cops get here, you son of a bitch." I used too much breath on those words. Another shard falls, then another. I went to get a large knife from the knife block we have in the kitchen, and I returned to where the man was breaking the window. There was already a hole big enough for him to crawl through, and he had already started. I ran back to the kitchen and grabbed the cordless phone, ran upstairs and dialed 911. I told them the exact words that I mouthed on my cell phone earlier, along with the fact that he was now inside my home. Unfortunately, the only doors with locks upstairs are the bathrooms. So, thinking on my feet, I went into my parents' room, into that bathroom, and locked the door. At that moment, I was thinking I was being smart because I left the bedroom door wide open, and the bathroom door that's actually inside the bedroom is not visible from the bedroom door. I thought if that guy managed to come upstairs before the cops got here, he would see the door wide open and think I wasn't in here. Suddenly, I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. My heart started pounding harder than ever, and it got harder to breathe. I opened one of the drawers looking for something sharp that I could maybe use as a weapon, and I think he must have heard the drawer, because he came stomping into the bedroom. I heard sirens outside, and I never could have thanked the cops enough for being so fast. He heard it too, and at this point he had nowhere to go. I heard him run outside, but he was too late. The police were out front already. I ran outside to the police as well, and I told them what happened. The man was arrested, handcuffs put around his bloodied wrists. I later figured out that I had killed that guy in Apex and kind of shit-talked him just an hour or two before. Somehow he got my address and Brandon's phone number. Some people are just fucked up in the head, and apparently they will do unspeakable things for video games. Everyone gets frustrated from getting killed in a game, but really, showing up at a person's house to potentially kill them in real life over a game is really messed up. This guy had to be mental. A few police cars stayed at my house overnight after the others had taken the man away. The man was convicted for aggravated burglary,